CD7. Chapter 15. Daphne had never been in an aircraft smaller than the King Air B200, but she wasn't worried. She knew the pilot. "What are you smiling about?" Rex asked as they pulled up at the private end of the airfield, where the authentic Oster, a small four-seater fabric aircraft that Rex had lovingly restored, was waiting for them. His crinkled eyes held a tenderness she hadn't seen directed at her before, and it sat in her chest like a freshly heated wheat bag, warm, radiant, and heavy with promise. "Just thinking how much faith I had in the pilot." "Had?" She had to laugh at that. "Have." He gave her a wink. "That's lucky," he said, pointing at the sky, though the weather promises to be smooth with good visibility. His eyes were alight, and he wasn't quite rubbing his hands as he looked at his ancient plane, but she could tell he was excited. It added to the happy feeling in her chest to see him so animated. "I'll take a level trip. Have you always been a fan of flying?" "Yep," he said. "Used to lie on my back in the paddock and watch the eagles wheel in the sky. Vowed I'd do that someday." "I'm glad you feel that way. It's nice." "You're nice." He smiled at her, and she saw a hint of promise as they pulled their overnight cases from the boot. Before his words even sank in, as if he knew she'd be stuck in a confusion of embarrassment because he'd complimented her, he went on. "Have you been to the races anywhere up here?" "No." Thank goodness for a change of subject. She resisted the urge to fan her face with her hand. "I've been to a couple of meets," he said, closing the boot. "I do enjoy a country race day." She hurried into speech, almost falling over her words in case he thought she wasn't talking enough. "Lorna bets every Saturday. Mia showed her the secrets of internet punting, though how a 16-year-old girl would know that is baffling." She shook her head with wonder. Mia had many hidden talents. Now, Lorna backs every Sydney race on the card, and she started Lachlan on it. They make a day of Saturdays. Everyone else laughs. Rex raised his brows. "Her son might be worried about that." "I doubt it. They only bet 50 cents a race, and she seems to come out ahead every week. Unlike Lachlan, who seems to do his $7.50 for the day. One week, she almost got the quadrella with a 50-cent bet, and the payout was about $10,000. He took her case, sent her a look when she tried to pick it up, and she put up her hands. "Okay, you can carry my bag." Sheesh. He'd opened the door for her when they'd left this morning, too. She loved it. "Funny setup you girls have out there. How's Lachlan coping with all the women?" "He's quiet, though Soretta says he's almost boisterous compared to what he was before the accident. But he seems to be fine with the invasion." Rex put the cases down beside the aircraft and scratched the back of his head. "I don't know how I'd go with that many women living in my house." "He gets on well with Lorna, or he can go to the other end of the house, or out on the farm when he wants to get away." She'd wondered about the man next to her. She should probably wait for later, but the conversation was so easy now, and there'd be no talking once they were up in the air. "Have you ever lived with a woman, Rex?" "Once, a long time ago. I was married. But it only lasted a year. I was working in Nigeria, flying for an oil company, and we were saving to buy our own home." He shrugged, and began to walk around the plane, checking rudders and wind speed instruments, the wings, the tail, the wooden propeller. She could watch him all day, except her eyes were drawn back to his face as he dropped the news she'd had no idea about after 6 months of working together. His voice was matter-of-fact. She found someone else while I was away, and I guess I was lucky that I didn't miss the signs and continue in ignorant bliss for years. She seemed to think I was making a big deal of it and was shocked when I asked for a divorce. She licked her lips. May as well get it all out there before they took off. My husband preferred more sophisticated women, and that wasn't me. He only married me for my father's patronage. Neither of them were patient men. Rex shot her a look, and his eyes were kind. Seems unfair that we pay for their lack of foresight, I always thought. But at least we can move on, and they're stuck with themselves. Daphne blinked in surprise, and from somewhere deep inside herself, she started to relax, to smile, and finally, to laugh. I'll try to look at it that way from now on. Rex paused, holding her eyes with his level gaze. He was a fool, Daphne. You're the real deal. He opened the passenger door for her, but before she could move past him, he put his hand gently on her arm. I've watched you the last 6 months, and you're one of the most sincere people I've ever met. You don't always get that with sophistication. Her face flamed. The blotches would be ugly, but there was nothing she could do about it. She wished she could start accepting that, too. Billy's gentle reminder rang in her ears. Take compliments graciously. Thank you, Rex. I enjoy working with you too. Phew, that hadn't been too hard. Good. Jump in. We'll get going on this weekend, shall we? He said as he winked at her. Now for the exciting part. There were more exciting things to come. She thought of her new clothes. Little did he know. The small red and yellow aircraft shone in the sunlight. Rex stowed the gear behind the seats with care. Daphne decided she'd buy herself 2 smaller soft-sided bags for next time. Next time? Lucky you travel light. And you, she said, allowing herself to revel in the pleasure of being here. On a weekend away. With a man. With Rex. Except for her not-so-memorable honeymoon, she'd never done this before with a man, and the only other times had been when she'd attended those 2-day midwifery conferences in Sydney, which had always been on her own. He pointed to the black line on the wing where she had to put her foot, then nodded in appreciation that she had the flat, slip-on pumps Billy had suggested she buy for climbing in and out of the aircraft. It had been a good choice. She couldn't imagine scratching Rex's little plane with nasty heels. Then her leg was through, and she sank down into one of the 2 side-by-side cockpit seats. Both sides had hand and feet controls, and she stayed well away from the U-shaped rudder. Rex leaned in to help her with her seatbelt. His hands were quick and confident, and impersonal. This used to be a flying doctor plane down in Tasmania when they flew around without radios in the early 60s. That's why I fell in love with it. I heard a story of them taking out the back window in a plane like this and feeding a bloke in through that way on a spine board. They looked at each other, sharing a mutual admiration for the logistics of the pioneers of the service and their larrikin ingenuity. We've got it easy. Easier, he agreed. She shrugged and looked admiringly at the plane again. It was a no-nonsense little ripper. Were there many models of Oster, or just this one? A few. This is a J5 autocar. Took me 2 years to have it pass the regulation requirements because it had run out of flying hours. I've got a licensed engineer friend in Broken Hill who helped me rebuild it from scratch, and it's got nearly 1,000 hours on it to go. It'll see me out for all the recreational flying I do. He handed her a gloriously old-fashioned leather helmet that strapped under the chin. I won 2 of these off a guy with a tiger moth. I have the windows open a lot of the time and wear mine. Would you put it on? I've always wanted to see a woman wear one in my plane. I'd love to. His eyes twinkled at her as she pulled on the helmet, and now she felt like Amelia Earhart. This was very cool. Rex checked the integrity of her seatbelt buckle again and stepped back. You're set. He jumped down. I'll just do the walk around again and then swing the prop. During the next 10 minutes, Daphne adjusted her helmet and put on the headphones Rex had pointed out. They were decades older than the ones she was used to, but it was all part of the fun, and the leather helmet kept them in place. She studied the instruments in front of her and the 2 half steering wheels for the 2 front seats. The whole aircraft was just so immaculately maintained. Then Rex called out to the empty tarmac, "All clear." He sent her a look that warmed her all the way down to her flat shoes, then swung the wooden propeller. The engine started first go, which was always reassuring, she thought with an inward smile. Pleased she wasn't at all nervous. Just exhilarated at the noise and air rushing at her from the propeller, because Rex had all the front sliding windows open to let out the heat. She twisted her head to see him come around the rear of the aircraft to the opposite door and climb in. Rex, gorgeous Rex, who she'd admired from afar, was sharing his love of flying with her. His eyes twinkled as he pulled on his own leather helmet and earphones, and she heard him speak to the tower. Then he put his thumbs up and revved the engine. She felt like the female lead in an adventure movie, and her mouth was so widely stretched with the joy of it all, she thought her face might split. They took off with the sun behind them, and she glanced out at the view she'd seen so many times before. The airport shrinking in their wake, the rows of houses, and the main street with its big and small roofs and gardens. Further out, there was the quick transition from green to brown flat land, with rocky outcrops punching through the earth like dinosaur backs. And to the left were the darker wriggling lines of dried creek beds. Even the empty dam below the homestead at Blue Hills Station looked wonderful. Rex tapped her on the shoulder and pointed down, and she leant to peer below again. She could see the sheep yards and a vehicle beside them, and someone on a quad bike, probably Soretta. She sat back as they fell behind and looked out the front into the clear skies ahead with a sense of everything being right in the world. Their plane bore noisily onwards. Even through the headphones, the wind rushed into her face as the cabin cooled, until finally Rex gestured for her to shut the sliding window. The noise died down marginally, and Rex crackled in her ear. "She's different to the King Air." She nodded at him and pressed her reply button. "Much more fun." He gave her the thumbs up, and they angled away towards Broken Hill and a wicked weekend. She hoped. The house seemed empty without Daphne. Billy hadn't realised how much she'd become accustomed to her friend's company. And it wasn't just the cooking. It was the debriefing of the day from their systems at night, or a worry that could be shared. Like Lorna being sick. She was ready to run into town, but she was waiting for Mia or Lachlan to come in before she could leave. Mia bounced in. "Hey, Mum, what you doing?" "Is that hey or hey, Miss Farm Girl?" "Wish we had hay to give to the ewes dropping late lambs." "Who are you? Where's my daughter?" Mia gave her a hug. "I'm here. Maybe I've just grown up a bit." "You've grown up a lot, and I couldn't be more proud of you. Has Soretta got anything planned for you this weekend?" "There's a gymkhana on Sunday over at Menindee. I was going to ask if we could go tonight instead of tomorrow morning. She's going to show me more of what's involved. Trent's sister's in it too." She looked at her mother thoughtfully. "Will you be okay if I go? With Daphne away?" Billy felt the rush of love for this girl woman, who she would lay down her life for. "Why, thank you. It's very kind of you to be concerned, but I might just take Lorna and go on an adventure." Or Lorna might take her on an adventure neither of them wanted to go on. "Watch Lorna for me, will you? Just until Lachlan comes back. She's not well and I'm running into town to get her some more medication." Billy saw the concern on her daughter's face as she replied, "Of course." "She's fragile," Billy added, and Mia nodded her understanding. Half an hour later, Billy drove into town to the hospital pathology department with a frown between her eyes and dropped off Lorna's samples. She hadn't thought about the pharmacy closing for lunch, but this was the country, not the city, and they had only one pharmacist. "Billy?" An unexpected relief coursed through her at the sound of Morgan's voice. Excellent. This could be a wonderful chance to talk to Morgan about her worry for Lorna. "Morgan, it's so good to see you." He took her arm and steered her across to an alcove. "You too." He leaned close and looked searchingly into her face. "You okay?" "Ah, yes, I guess I am." She almost blurted it out there and then. Something happened this morning, but she didn't know where to start. "Would you like a coffee?" She checked her watch. The hand had only moved 5 minutes, and she had 25 to go until the pharmacy opened. "Sure, thanks. Why are you at the hospital?" "Just checking on Jack Fortescue. He came off his quad bike and broke his hip." He steered her as he spoke, and within seconds she found herself sitting at a corner table that afforded a tad more privacy than you normally found in a hospital cafeteria. "Poor guy." "Yeah," he said, piercing her with his dark eyes. "What's up?" She grimaced ruefully. "Is it that obvious?" "To me it is." The words were flat and didn't invite comment, as if he wasn't comfortable with his own perception. "It's Lorna. She woke confused this morning, didn't know where she was." He frowned. "She's all right now?" "Seems to be. I think she's quite shaken by the thought that she might be heading to dementia." "I imagine so. Something everyone jokes about, but only because they're terrified." He grimaced. "They reckon it's the #1 concern for anyone over 50. It ranks higher than worries about financial security." He shook his head. "But is this the first sign she'd noticed? It's a bit too soon for that conclusion, isn't it?" "That's what I said." The waitress arrived and they ordered their coffees, declining food. Billy picked up a paper napkin and began to smooth it out. His hand came over and stilled hers momentarily before he took it away again. It was bad, then. His touch broke into her thoughts. She said her daughter-in-law mentioned she might need placement if her memory got worse. I think she'd brushed that off until now, and suddenly it seems real. But she woke disorientated, and I guess she's thinking of her husband's illness. She folded the napkin again and looked at him. She's just been so happy and settled, and we all love having her. It's a horrible thought, and I want to dismiss the idea that Lorna could have early signs of Alzheimer's. There could be other causes. She nodded. I know. I told her sometimes it was an infection that could send people off. So I took some bloods and a urine sample, and I've just dropped them in. That's good. Sensible. His voice softened, and his hand came across and patted hers. Did you offer the 5-minute test for dementia? Yes. I sat her down, explained about the mini mental status examination, and we talked through it. She frowned as she told him the result. Lorna scored really high considering her level of education. But I think there's a marked deterioration from her previous clarity of thinking. He squeezed her hand as his eyes stared at a point on her collar. She could tell he was running through his own knowledge of mental deterioration in the elderly for something that would help her. It felt good to know that he cared. It felt even better to know he was a fabulous resource she could rely on. The need to hug him was sudden and fierce in its intensity. Finally, he said, "Then something is going on there." She didn't think he noticed her pink cheeks from her uncomfortable thoughts. But you're right. It could be as simple as an infection. We brought a drover in with the same thing last year. Turned out he'd been brewing a huge ingrown toe infection and hadn't told anyone until he went silly and started getting lost on the way between the bunkhouse and the homestead. Totally confused. Initially, they thought he was drunk. He sat back and sighed, and with the movement, his hand slid away. She instantly missed his warmth and sympathy, which was silly. She talked to cover the loss. We'll do proper testing later, but in the meantime, I've started Lorna on antibiotics. I'm just waiting for pharmacy to come back from lunch to get the full script filled. Her fingers drifted back to the serviette. I'm praying that's the reason Lorna is muddled. It's unbearable to think of someone so vibrant and caring being lost to confusion. And even more heartbreaking, I think she's terrified. Morgan voiced her own thoughts. Dementia is such a mongrel disease. But this is sudden, and I think you're jumping too quickly to the dark answers. She nodded. I keep telling myself that. She sat back, feeling measurably calmer, and remembered something she should have thought about earlier. We had a sad case too, now I think about it. A high-profile philanthropist at my last medical practice. She wasn't one of my patients, but I knew her well. A lovely woman in her early 70s, very prim and proper and perfectly mannered at all times. They found her walking up the street naked and brought her into the surgery. Billy shuddered at the memory. It was lunchtime on a market day, and kids took photos on their mobile phones. It was splashed all over the internet. Her husband, another high-profile individual, had her admitted to a mental health care facility, where the first thing they did as a routine ward admission was a micro-urine test. When her UTI was corrected, they discovered that her dementia had resolved as well, but her marriage crumbled. It was dreadful. Her embarrassment at being admitted to a mental institution and her behaviour took her months to overcome. They looked at each other and winced. Morgan sighed. A tough thing to recover from, especially for a woman. She put her hand over her face. My worst nightmare. He grinned. So, if you did strip off here and now, you'd mind if I took a picture? She smiled at his teasing, some of her black mood shifting. I might forgive you if you didn't put it on the internet. So I could arrange a private viewing? He asked, wickedly. She shook her head. She appreciated his attempts to lift her mood, but enough was enough. Maybe another time. That's better than nothing. He smiled fully into her eyes, and she forgot to breathe there for a moment. Tell me. His voice softened. Was there a good ending to your lady's experience? Billy nodded. The other doctor in our surgery asked me to speak to her, and finally we suggested she tell her story publicly. Give an interview to help others. She was so brave. The subsequent newspaper article resulted in a flood of support and congratulations on her courage in going public. She and her husband were friends, at least the last time I heard. It gives you the shudders to think of the outcome in the old days. Must have been asylums full of sane people driven mad by their circumstances. He took her hand again. That's not going to happen to Lorna. Billy felt an enormous weight lift off her. She cared about Lorna, and Morgan was showing he cared too. Thanks for being here. I was wilting under the burden without Daphne. Though I had a word with Lachlan, and he said he'd keep an eye on her in case she became confused again. They get on well, but I don't like being away too long. Where's Daphne? It's her and Rex's weekend at the races. He raised his brows. I'd forgotten about that. He stared out the window and then nodded. Rex has fancied her for a while. Has he? I never noticed, she said, tongue in cheek. Women aren't the only ones who notice these things, he said smugly. He's got good weather for it. Good weather for what? Innocently, he shrugged. The races, of course. They smiled at each other. Then, unexpectedly, he said, Invite me out for the afternoon. I could come with you back to the station. Spend the day out there. Be in the background. A second opinion. The instant clutching of the lifeline felt disproportional to the offer. Either Lorna's confusion had distressed her more than she'd realised, or she wanted Morgan's company more than she realised. Maybe both. Definitely both. I'd like that. Thank you. When they arrived at the station, Lachlan and Lorna were listening to the races. Lachlan had a crease of worry on his brow, and he seemed to be hovering beside Lorna's chair as if he was afraid she'd run away. Billy, Morgan, good to see you both. His relief was obvious, and Billy felt her heart sink. So Lorna was getting worse. Lorna squinted in their direction as if she didn't know them. We have visitors, Wallace. Hello, Lorna. I'm back. Billy crossed the veranda and sat in the chair vacated by Lachlan. Lorna clearly didn't know who she was, so she prompted, It's Billy. I've brought you some medicine for your tummy. She indicated Morgan. You remember Morgan? Of course, Lorna said, displaying some of her trademark spunk. I'm not senile, you know. Billy smiled, but her chest was tight. She stood up again and motioned for Morgan to take her place. I'll just get you some water for your next tablet. Lachlan followed her inside to the kitchen and all the way over to the sink, where he leant towards her and lowered his voice before the words poured out. She's been totally off with the fairies, he said sadly, calling me Wallace. Can't remember which race or what horse. Billy put her hand on his arm. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have left you, but I wanted to get her more antibiotics. It's come on very suddenly, which makes it even more likely she'll be right as rain when the tablets kick in. But we won't leave you again. I'm not worried about me. Lachlan was offended. I'm worried about her. She'd hate to think she was losing her marbles. Like Toodles in Peter Pan. It was such a funny thing to say that Billy laughed. Lachlan continued to surprise her. I'd forgotten about Toodles and Peter Pan. But give us 12 hours and I'll see how she goes. Lachlan shook his head. I'm no doctor, but can't you stick it in her vein or something? Make it work quicker? Billy had thought of that, but it meant transferring her to hospital for a full workup. I could, but she'd need to go into hospital, and the unfamiliar place might make her worse before it makes her better. She could really go off in there, and she'd hate that. I can't justify that without a thorough workup, and I think it would upset her, disorientate her more. I'm waiting for an early report on her pathology, which will give us a better idea of how to treat her. Lachlan nodded resignedly. I shouldn't be trying to tell you how to do your job. Billy patted his hand. Hey, I'm always happy for suggestions. You care. We all care. She filled the glass and took another tablet from the pack on the windowsill to give to Lorna. She'd started her with a double dose. We'll take it slow today. Hopefully everything will get better. When they returned to the veranda, Morgan appeared relaxed, and even Lorna looked more settled. She took the pills. Thank you, Billy. She glanced around. I think I'm a little off today. The antibiotics should help. And it's Saturday. We all have the day off and can relax. Morgan's come to spend the day with us. So, how does that work if both the doctors are here? Lachlan scratched his head. Morgan answered, one of the locum doctors flies in to cover from Friday night to Monday morning, and Billy and I cover the rest. I'm still on call 24 hours a day, 5 days a week, but now Billy takes some of the workload off me. Lachlan shook his head. You all work too hard, he suggested with a knowing look. You should take him up to the ridge later, when Lorna has her rest. It's a great place to watch the sun go down across the barrier ranges. Chapter 16. They did have a leisurely day. Lachlan won a couple of races, and even Billy chose one with a name she liked. Lorna was muddled, but not upset, and everyone began to relax somewhat. Later that afternoon, when Lorna had lain down for a nap, Morgan and Billy took that drive up to the ridge on the quad bike. It was bumpy and slow, but Billy decided the beauty of the landscape was best appreciated that way anyway, and they had a bit of time. Who was she kidding? It was hard to concentrate on the scenery when her breasts were squashed up against Morgan's powerful back and her hands were clutched around his waist. She tightened her grip as they hit another small rock on the roughly graded track. Morgan had been up to the ridge before, and they had their phones with them in case Lachlan needed them. She spoke into his ear. "Soretta has been meaning to take Daphne and I up here, but we never seemed to find the time." He slowed and turned his head to answer. "You'll only need to be shown once. It's a good spot. The road is rough but well marked." The track led between two hills and across a wide, dry creek bed that was achingly beautiful, even in its waterless state. They stopped just to drink in the sight, even if they couldn't splash in any water. Billy was pleased to see that Morgan seemed to absorb as much pleasure as she did from the landscape. Stately white gums, some of their trunks arched back like dancers exposing their bellies to the leafy canopy above, while others reached up with long white fingers to the sky. The deep orange soil of the parched creek was cracked into diamonds and squares of dried mud that had split apart and curled at the edges to look like panes in old-fashioned window frames. The grey-green leaves shimmered above, and the occasional leaf and twig drifted down in eddies onto the diamonds as the noisy cockatoos settled into the branches for the late afternoon. Morgan pointed to the clump of Sturt's desert pea tucked in a corner behind a rock. The runners of the ground-dwelling branches were covered with downy hairs, and the long blood-red flowers rose in clusters on their upright stalks, with the black centres like tiny featureless faces midway up the bloom. The pointy greenish ground cover filled the spaces between the red splashes of colour. Billy had always loved the desert pea flowers, could remember picnics with her parents at riverbeds just like this, and searching for the clumps of red flowers after lunch. "I tried to grow those in Sydney, but they always died." She'd thought of her parents more in the last months than she had for years. It was poignant, but maybe time to remember the good times she'd blocked out in the past. She'd been too worried about Mia and Mia's father to dwell on the loving and wonderful childhood she'd had. Morgan was still absorbed in the prolific flowers. They managed the dry. She looked around. "I've missed this. Missed even the harshness of the place, the ebb and flow of drought and flood, and the vibrant colours. The sky so blue it dazzles and makes everything else look clearer and brighter. I wanted Mia to appreciate the outback, but she was always busy and keen to stay beachside. I think now she's here, it's growing on her pretty fast." "She seems to have settled in well," he said with a smile in his voice. "You may not be able to move her soon." She nodded. "Soretta says she's never seen anyone as good with animals, and she doesn't hand out compliments freely. And Mia's finally digging in at school. Her grades are great. Wants to be a vet, and Lorna's been helping with her extra homework." They both sobered at the thought of Lorna. "Homework help is not a pastime for someone with dementia," he reassured her. "I keep telling myself that. Come on, we'd better get on or we'll miss the light. And when we can't describe it, Lachlan will think we've been doing something else." She raised her brows. "I can't imagine what you're talking about." He looked at her with a tinge of scepticism. "I can almost believe that." She laughed and climbed on behind him and gave his waist a squeeze. "Oh, you mean that?" He started the engine. "Yes, that." She grinned into his back. This was nice. More than nice. Exciting. Fun. Not something she'd had a whole lot of in her life, and she was actually in no rush to progress to emotional angst. But he did feel wonderful to hang on to. She imagined briefly what it would be like to wake up in the morning with Morgan's strong body next to hers. A great way to start the day. Imagine. He turned his head briefly. "You okay?" She stared at his strong neck and shoulders right in front of her nose. "Just enjoying the view," she said into his ear. They were climbing up the last part of the track, and she could see it wouldn't be much further to the flat spot on top of the range. Someone had dragged a rusted 1940s utility as a burial ground feature against the sparse scenery. It added a surreal quality with the wheelless chassis resting on the ground and a tumble of larger granite rocks piled around it. The golden ball of the sun was almost to the distant skyline, and the undulating ranges behind them were dusted red gold with the reflection. Long shadows stretched from rocks and stunted trees and side of the rusted vehicle cabin, and she leant against it to watch the shadows lengthen. Morgan opened the creaking door and gestured her in. "Where would you like to go?" She declined. "I like a few springs on my seat when I travel." He laughed. "There's no pleasing some women." Then he shut the door on the empty cab so she could rest against it, and they both turned to the view. "This is really beautiful." Morgan shifted up next to her and touched his hip to hers. "Scenery's good too." She turned her face towards him, and he surprised her by taking her hand. His warm fingers stroked hers, and he seemed to be waiting for a reaction. She stared down at their entwined fingers. How long had it been since a man had caressed her like this? Since she'd let one. The gentleness was so beautiful, she just allowed herself the luxury of receiving it without comment or movement. But that wasn't a good enough response for Morgan, apparently. "Dead fish," he said, and shook her wrist, and she laughed, though she felt like a shy schoolgirl on her first date. "I was waiting to see your moves," she quipped. It was his turn to laugh. "Oh, I've got moves." He kissed her lightly on the tip of her nose. "Just want to make sure you're alive first." She blinked, and then she stared at his mouth as it hovered. "Try again," she said. So he did, gently kissed her lips, and the sensation flew through her like a rush of warmth. Oh, I'm alive all right. The touch of his mouth rocked her like a shudder had shifted the whole range under her foot. She hoped he didn't realize how much power he really had. "As a move, 4 out of 10, she whispered. "That wasn't a move. That was sussing you out." He looked deeply into her eyes. 4? That's a bit harsh. She lifted her gaze to his, her mouth curving, loving the promise of humour between them, something she hadn't seen in the beginning, and the promise of being swept away by someone she could grow to trust. Maybe a 6. He laughed and pulled her around so she was leaning on him in the circle of his arms. "You lie," he said with conviction. His back was solid against the truck, and she pressed her whole weight on him. He was like a rock. Even that aura of immovable power was worth a 10. Then he lowered his head, and with darkening eyes, he brushed his mouth against hers gently, and then with more pressure, until he took possession and kept it, enticing her until the concept of scoring was blown out of her shrinking mind. Her legs gave way, and he held her, easily, clasping the back of her head as if he couldn't bear the thought of her moving away, and she quite agreed with him. The moments stretched into 100 moments. Some short, some infinitely long. None of them enough. Kissing Morgan properly was like a whole smorgasbord in itself, and she didn't want to stop. When he put her gently from him, the sun had slipped away unnoticed, and she seriously didn't mind that she'd missed seeing it set. She drew a ragged breath and concentrated on feeling her feet on the ground. He was looking smug. She tilted her head at him. "Where did you learn to kiss?" He shrugged. "I may have been a gigolo in a past life." She touched her mouth wonderingly. "I believe you." He laughed. "You do not." He sobered. "In all seriousness, I think my kissing definitely improves when I kiss you." She couldn't help the pleased smile she could feel on her face. "I think that's a compliment." "It's a concern." He seemed to study the deep red of the sunless sky. There was a crease against his forehead, and his light mood had evaporated. Darn it! Why couldn't anything be smooth? It wasn't her fault he'd kissed her and they'd imploded. "We'd better get back. I don't fancy the track in the dark." And with those words he changed, became more serious. She knew this guy too, and she wasn't sure what his problem was. It was just a kiss. But the voice inside her head laughed at her. That was not just a kiss. They made it back to the homestead as the last of the twilight faded. It sat serene and solid, like welcoming arms, and a promise of solace for the confusion she could feel bubbling inside her. She'd spent most of the trip with her cheek against his back, just soaking in the smell of him. The veranda lights glowed as they drove the quad bike into the shed. Lachlan was sitting at the kitchen table with his checkbook and bills spread over Lorna's favourite linen. He watched them approaching and gestured to the invoices in answer to their silent question. "I'm taking my mind off poor Lorna's troubles. Soretta's done a stellar job while I've been gone, managing the finances. Better than it should be." That was great for all of them, and she hoped he passed that on to his granddaughter. "How is Lorna?" Billy asked quietly, and then held her breath. "Still asleep. I just checked her. She looks peaceful." Billy let out a sigh. That was a relief. Sleep should help her recover. I'll wake her later for the next dose of antibiotics. She wasn't looking forward to that if Lorna didn't recognise her. Lachlan was looking way more relaxed, and now he was smiling at them with a twinkle. "How was the sunset?" "Beautiful." She tried not to blush. "Is there a story to that old car up on the ridge?" He nodded, diverted from teasing. "My parents went on their honeymoon in that car. It's a 1942 Ford jail bar. When it died, my dad took it up there as a joke. So whenever my mum mentioned a holiday, he'd take her up there and put her bag in the cab." You men all have the same sense of humour. Lachlan and Morgan exchanged amused glances, and she walked over to the slow cooker where Daphne had left a meatloaf cooking early this morning before she left. Aromatic tendrils drifted up when she lifted the lid and seduced her nose. Or was she feeling a little immersed in her senses at the moment? She sighed blissfully. "That smells divine." "I put the potatoes on, and there's enough for you too," he said to Morgan. "No offence, Billy, but occasionally male company doesn't go astray." "Too late. I'm offended." She wasn't. Lachlan did well with all of them, and it was nice that Morgan might stay. She was about to ask him if he would when he put down his keys. And that's when she realised he had been about to leave. So he had been going to run. It seemed their kiss really had rattled him. He straightened. "Of course I'll stay. It smells great." "Thanks." Lachlan waggled his shaggy brows. "We could tell him we made it." Billy shrugged. "He wouldn't believe us." Morgan chuckled, finally looking more at ease. "Let me guess. Daphne did?" "Yep." Billy thought about Daphne and Rex away. "I hope they're having a great time." "So do I." Morgan's expression was serious again. "Last thing we need is broken hearts all over the base." Was that directed at her? The thought sent a cold trickle down her back. She hoped it wasn't about them. "Spoken like the boss. I'm going to get a cardigan for that chill you just brought in. Then I'll be back to set the table." "I can start that," Morgan said. Was that an apology? Maybe. Maybe not. Who knew with him? Mr. Hot Again, Cold Again. "Thanks." But she didn't look at him as she left the room. Just thought about that scorching kiss on the ridge, and the fact that now he was all bitter and twisted and running scared again. Like she was the expert here. Well, she wasn't. When Daphne and Rex landed at Broken Hill Airport, Daphne found herself much more aware of the physical aspects of landing in a 1950s aircraft. The bumping around, the roaring wind, and the incredibly loud noise even through the headphones. It was all very invigorating. She slid open the side window, and more noise rushed in with the hot air. She'd landed here so many times for work, it seemed strange not to taxi up to the flying doctor part of the apron. Instead, they turned right, with the big wooden propeller spinning in front of them. They passed the passenger terminal, the parked jet with its row of windows waiting for its next load off to Sydney. Finally, they drew to a halt outside the civil aviation hangar. She stayed strapped in and waited patiently, just enjoying the fact there was no anxious patient to worry about. Nothing to worry about, it seemed, as Rex had everything under control. It felt good. More than good. It felt wonderful to take a metaphorical back seat. The engine stopped, as did the propeller, and the noise died down so that she was able to pull off her earmuffs. Then, reluctantly, she removed her helmet and stroked the soft leather. This really was one fab helmet. Rex helped her out, and he took both their bags and ushered her across the heating tarmac to the shed. A pencil-thin guy in shorts and a singlet handed over a set of car keys. He gestured to a rental, a comfortable AWD vehicle, and handed Rex a map. When they opened the door, the heat billowed out, even though the car had been thoughtfully parked under a tree. "We'll wait a minute," Rex said. Daphne's gaze travelled the airport's surrounds. "It looks different from this angle." "We're tourists." He smiled, and she smiled back. While they waited for it to cool, Rex asked, "Do you know Broken Hill well?" She shook her head. "I came for my interview, and we did a week's orientation here and in Brisbane." Daphne thought about the blur that had been her first few weeks in the air. "I got so tired in the early days on the flights, I'd just go home to sleep." Rex nodded. "They do 12-hour shifts here too, don't they? Until you get acclimatized, The decreased oxygen in flight is enough to make you tired. He started the car and ran the aircon. And after a few minutes, it was pleasantly cool. Okay, hop in. We'll head over to the pub where we're staying and get unpacked. Maybe do some sightseeing and take a run out to Silverton. I haven't been there either. Once they were buckled in, he pulled out into the sparse traffic. And we're going to do touristy things, he commanded, his eyes crinkling. She loved it when they did that. They looked so soft and blue, like the sky he prized so much. He was an adorable man from any angle. Too adorable for her. You look sad. You okay? She straightened her obviously sagging face. How embarrassing. No, I'm fine, having a wonderful time. She straightened her shoulders higher and lifted her chin. I really appreciate you bringing me. He frowned, then did a quick check in the rear vision mirror before flicking on the indicator. Slowing down, he pulled over to the side of the road under a shady gum tree. Before she realised what he was doing, he'd stopped and turned off the car, unclicked his seatbelt, and turned to face her. His face was serious. Tell me, Daphne, why do you think I invited you to come with me? She forced herself to meet his gaze, reminded herself that this was Rex, that she knew Rex and had always admired him. Only she wished she hadn't come now, because if she said something stupid, this could impact on their working relationship. For company? Because you'd booked 2 rooms? And why did I book 2 rooms? She looked away. For company? She felt his finger on her chin, and he used it to turn her face back towards him. For you. Well, yes, I understand the other room is for me now. He nodded to himself, as if something had been confirmed. Had she said something stupid? She was so stupid. He studied her intently. Stop. She jumped. What? It was always for you. I booked that room for you. Took my time. Made sure you would have time off because I wanted you to come. I wanted to spend time with you outside work. Me? Had she squeaked? She settled her breathing and tried again, but all the words seemed stuck. Oh, she said finally. Thank you. And then she smiled because a tiny bubble of anticipation had slipped under her guard and made its way to her mouth. She grinned at him. So there wasn't anyone else who let you down and I'm the fill-in? He shook his head. Who else could there be? Oh, my. Oops, she'd said that out loud. Oh, my, indeed. In that case, let's go have fun. He nodded before leaning over and kissing her cheek deliberately, like he really meant it. He then turned on the engine and steered back onto the road. Rex had kissed her because he wanted to kiss her cheek. Maybe Rex had wanted to do more. She resisted the urge to lift her hand and stroke the spot she could feel glowing. Apparently, Rex had moved on from his disastrous marriage, and now it was time for her to do that too. In a normal voice, as if he didn't know he had just tilted Daphne's world into a whole new dimension, Rex said, So you've never been to the races? Just the Melbourne Cup. Her brain wasn't really working yet. Just. He laughed. Well, this isn't the Melbourne Cup. Excellent. Flemington on race day terrified me. He frowned at her in confusion. How could a horse race terrify you? Not the races, the women. She really hadn't meant to say that. Well, not really the women, just the fashions and the fear of falling on my face. In front of my husband or father. You know, of dropping sauce down my dress. She'd done both at the one Melbourne Cup she'd attended. And she hadn't had a drink like the newspaper had suggested. Her husband had been furious. I have this dread of social disasters. I was pretty young then. Rex went on. This is a country race meeting. It's as laid back as we want, so you can relax, enjoy yourself. Nobody cares. Enjoy herself. Daphne vowed to try to achieve that goal. She thought about the Melbourne Cup experience and mentally tossed it out of the window. Let's do that. They stayed at the Palace Hotel, which was on the main street of Broken Hill and famous for the scenes from the Australian cult movie Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. The magnificent murals lined the entry hall, the towering ceiling, and above and beneath the stairs that led to their rooms. Daphne could feel the smile tugging on her lips as she climbed the stairs. The hand-painted murals just kept getting more extravagant. This is different, she puffed, as Rex carried their 2 bags beside her. He wasn't even breathing heavily on the steep stairs, but she consoled herself with the fact that his legs were longer. He grinned at her. I know. Can't help picturing the guy who painted the ceiling lying on his back, painting Venus. He's no Botticelli, but he's definitely got the touch for grandeur. She examined the brochure in her hand. Seeing as how I'm not carrying any luggage, I've got a free hand to look at the descriptions, she said cheekily. It says his name was Mario, but the rest was painted by an Indigenous artist called Gordon Way. Only took Gordon 8 hours to paint the first one in the bar. Just a little something he whipped up. We might have to sit out on the steps with a drink later, then just soak them in. Oh, she'd love that. Loved the idea that Rex had the mental space to devote time to just admiring something that appealed to him. It appealed to her, too. She could easily imagine sitting on an old wooden step surrounded by hand-painted extravagant oil murals, with Rex sipping a glass of beer. Maybe he'd put his arm around her shoulders, and they'd smile and imagine what the artist had been thinking while he painted. Truth be told, it sounded better than the races. Rex stopped at the top. So, this is yours, m'lady. The sign read, Priscilla Suite. A suite? To myself? His eyes twinkled. So it seems. He nodded at the room next door. And that's me. She checked the sign on the door and then the brochure in her hand. So I have the room with the murals? She could feel the heat in her cheeks as she realised he'd wanted to please her. Make her smile. That he cared enough to give her the best room. It's an old hotel. We're doing fun, not grand. She pushed open the door and gasped. An oil-painted stream cascaded across the wall, flanked by gum trees. Truly magnificent. She took a peek at him. How long ago did you say you booked this room? He shrugged. There was a cancellation. He was very sweet. Thank you. I love it. He put down her bag and looked mightily pleased with himself. "I'm glad. We're here for 2 days. Maybe you'd like to unpack, and I'll knock on your door in 10 minutes. She almost saluted, but he was gone, and that was more Billy's style anyway. She thought of the girls at home and how much she would astonish Billy and Lorna with Rex's thoughtfulness. Describing it would be like reliving this adventure all over again. She hadn't had that many adventures she'd wanted to relive. She reminded herself to enjoy the present moment, the now. Scanning the room, she marvelled again at the huge mural on her wall and allowed the pleasure to soak in. It was dated and delightful. Bless Rex. They met 10 minutes later, decided on a drive, and Rex steered them out past the long line of load from the silver mine that dominated the skyline and out into the undulating sparseness of saltbush and dirt. That part was like home. Rex pulled over at the Menindee lookout, and she climbed out before she realised he'd intended to open her door. Damn, she'd have to practice that waiting thing. They stood at the side of the drop-off and stared over the brown land with the green-grey patches of desert foliage and outcrops of rock. She'd seen this so many times from the air, but it was just as glorious to see it up close in the three-dimensional reality. Rex slipped his arm around her waist and edged her back from the steep slope. "Daredevil," he said mildly, and kept his arm there. She guessed it was so she wouldn't fall, but it didn't matter why he did it, because it felt nice and started a gentle thrum in her knees. She twisted her neck to peer at his face. He was gazing over the expanse, and she could see his strong throat and the faint beginnings of the light-coloured regrowth on his chin. There was something attractive about a man's regrowth, and she'd always had a sneaking admiration of Rex with stubble. He squeezed her waist as their eyes met. "Ready to move on?" Was there a hidden meaning in that? And if he had put a different layer of question in there, was she ready? She took a breath. "Absolutely. I'm loving this, Rex." Two could put a double meaning in a comment. He squeezed her waist again and steered her towards the car, and this time she waited until he opened her door. They had a late lunch at Silverton, in the original pub that had been christened with more than a dozen names, its walls plastered with newspaper clippings and old signed photographs of movie stars, commercials and photo shoots, all of which were made in the almost deserted mining town. Then they drove back towards Broken Hill and veered into the living desert reserve before the tourist buses arrived at sunset. This time, when Rex opened her door, he took her hand and kept it cradled in his own as they climbed the path to the top of the hill. She could feel the strength of his fingers, the extra 10 beats of her heart, and the heat in her cheeks. She tried to concentrate on the sculptures that soared from their footings on the red soil and read the plaques explaining each artist's concept of his creation. There was a window of time between the people ahead of them leaving and the next arriving, and Rex guided her into a shady spot and stopped. "I'd like to kiss you." She blinked, could feel herself heat up and start to panic. No, she wasn't going to ruin this. She nodded, but then decided that wasn't enough. "I'd like that," she said a touch primly. But the important thing was that she'd said it, and she saw him lean closer before she closed her eyes. She should have kept them open a while longer, because she waited and nothing happened. When she opened her eyes, he was smiling at her. "You looked so worried, I wasn't sure I should. How about you kiss me?" She glared at him, and he must have known he'd done the wrong thing, because he laughed and pulled her to him and kissed her with a toe-curling thoroughness that made her forget her awkwardness. She slid her hands up and around his neck and pulled him closer. The tang of his aftershave mixed with the warm, fresh smell of Rex, and the whole gamut was intoxicating. He was the one who heard the footsteps coming up the path. She certainly didn't, because he set her away from him with gentle firmness and took her hand again. "I knew that would be worth waiting for," he murmured, and drew her along to a wooden seat that looked over the hectares of reserve protecting the natural fauna and flora and winding between the outcrops. They could see the long walking path they'd missed by driving to the summit. But her eyes were too full of stars to care much about the view. My Lord, he was good at that kissing business. Who would have thought it? The hidden talents of a bush pilot. This is the end of CD 7. The book continues on CD 8. CD 8. Chapter 17. More people arrived at the sculptures, and the first of the buses hissed with the doors opening as the afternoon drew closer to sunset. Rex leant across and spoke quietly into her ear. "Would you like to wait for the sunset?" No siree. The idea of people setting up picnics around them wasn't really what she had in mind. What she wanted was to find somewhere quiet and be kissed by Rex again. "Not really, unless you want to." "Let's go then," he said, and pulled her to her feet, keeping her hand, making her feel relaxed and comfortable and incredibly safe. She could get used to this. They drove back into town with the long shadows from the afternoon sun behind them. Back at the Palace Hotel, Rex suggested they change for dinner. Not to hurry, and he'd meet her on the veranda outside their rooms to watch the sunset. Daphne could feel the trickle of sweat down her back, and she'd rubbed off most of her makeup. The idea of standing under a stream of cool water and emerging refreshed was too tempting, so she set out the floaty silver dress and the strappy heels that went with it and dived into the shower. 20 minutes later, when she stepped onto the veranda, lightly made up and faintly perfumed, Rex was waiting. He changed into light-coloured jeans and an open-necked blue shirt that matched his eyes that appreciated her warmly. He looked strong and casual and very relaxed. She wished she had half his composure. "You look beautiful," he said. She froze like a rabbit in headlights until she remembered Billy. Sucking in a breath, she forced out a "Thank you, kind sir," with as much nonchalance as she could muster. It felt stilted, but she'd done it, accepted a compliment, and it hadn't killed her. He pulled out the chair at the little wrought-iron table between their rooms, leant into her hair as she sat down, and murmured, "You smell good, too." She sat down with more of a bump than a graceful settle, but he didn't seem to notice because he was paying attention to the wine. Rex the connoisseur. Hidden talents? She stifled a nervous giggle. He'd acquired an ice bucket and a bottle of expensive sparkling wine, and she looked longingly at it. That's what she needed, a settling sip of alcohol. She raised her brows at the glass he poured for himself. "Now that's a first. I wondered if you even drank," she teased. He shrugged. Not often. My dad was a drover who settled in Mica Ridge, and he liked a bender. He was a happy drunk, but if I drink, it's not much. It's over 24 hours until I fly again, he said seriously, and this is a special occasion. She hugged that comment to herself and stored away a little bit of family history that you never heard from Rex. He lifted his glass. To us, and a good day at the races. He grinned at her. But you can have most of it. No thanks. Who knew what she'd say if she drank too much? Are you trying to get me sloshed, Rex? I have an idea that could be entertaining, but no. We're going to have a good day tomorrow at the races, and I don't want you there with a hangover. Lord, she seconded that and reminded herself to have 2 glasses, max. That was the thing. With their job, they rarely drank because they were so frequently on call. So more than a glass of wine tended to hit her like a hammer. She looked across the varnished veranda boards to the wrought iron balcony. The sun had almost disappeared behind the buildings opposite. Everything lay bathed in a golden red glow, and patterns were appearing from the black metal lace on the roof. This is gorgeous. They said it was a good place in the afternoons. He topped up her glass of the effervescent wine, and it threatened to foam over the top. Out of practice, he murmured. She felt herself warm at his habit of talking to himself. She hadn't noticed that before. It wasn't something he did when flying, but apparently he did so when he was with her. It endeared him to her. So maybe he wasn't as sure of himself as he seemed, and that made her way more relaxed. They raised the wine, and it caught the sun with a suitably romantic sparkle until the tiny, non-resonant clunk from cheap glasses made them smile. I've had a lovely day, Rex. Me too. He took a sip and put the glass down, reached across and stroked her cheek with his finger. You looking forward to tomorrow? He sat back and studied her with leisure. She could feel the awareness run down her neck and into her belly, and lower. Looking forward to tomorrow. And perhaps tonight as well. She licked suddenly dry lips. Very much. So am I. He slid a folded newspaper across the table, and she picked it up. The form guide. He pointed to a race. The Silver City Cup. I'm going for She Flies High. Daphne studied the list of names. I think I fancy In With a Chance. It had a good ring to it, she thought vaguely. I was hoping you'd go for that one. Rex laughed out loud. Daphne realised what she'd said, took a quick sip from her glass to cover her confusion, and inhaled her wine. The coughing fit lasted for a couple of minutes. By the time she'd recovered, Rex had her standing up, leaning her head on his chest, and was patting her back. Does that mean I'm not in with a chance? She wiped her streaming eyes. You set me up. You took the bait beautifully, but I really didn't want to see you choke. Of course you did, she said. Then she thought of another time with Rex, a tense and desperate flight full of last-minute anxiety. Remember the time I thought that patient was going to choke to death, and you got me down on the ground so fast we managed to get a tube in between us just in time? He nodded. His face was suddenly serious. I remember. His voice lowered to a murmur. I've lost count of the times I've shaken my head and wondered how you managed to get them to the destination without them dying. You're incredible, Daphne. She tried to drop her chin, but he wouldn't let her. He lifted her face with his finger again, refusing to take no for an answer. You are incredible, Daphne. Like a child, she recited, Thank you, Rex. Better, he said, and kissed her nose. Then her eyelids, her cheeks, finally her mouth. He started slowly with a gentle sweep of her lips, his hand cupping the back of her head, and then he applied more pressure against her mouth. She could feel herself melt against him. Melting felt so damn good. Why had she never known about this, she wondered. But then the thought was gone as he teased her lips apart and a whole new dimension opened. She lost all power of thought as the world narrowed to the taste and delicious tangle of their tongues in the age-old dance of seduction. She was lost for a long time, and the shadows were all gone when finally Rex pulled back. Even she could see his reluctance, and she loosened her death grip on his shoulders and allowed herself to be put away from him. He looked a little dangerous, and she found herself smiling up at him. She liked the look, and she was feeling a little dangerous herself. He set his jaw. "Where would you like to go for dinner?" She touched the tension at the side of his mouth. Her turn to tease. "Do we have to?" He blinked. "I've no idea." She raised her brows. "Did I show you the mural in my room?" His eyes darkened again. "Briefly." She took him by the hand and drew him towards her door. "Come and have a better look." The next morning, Daphne woke with her head on Rex's chest. He had much more hair on his chest than she expected, but she decided if she counted them, then it would come out at the perfect number. She sighed happily and felt his hand stroking her shoulder. "Hello, beautiful," he said. She grinned. "Damn, I was just going to say that." His chest shook under her, and then he shifted, and suddenly she was beneath him, her cheeks cradled in his hands, his strong body suspended over her. "Good morning." "It seems it is." She smiled shyly up at him, and he lowered his head towards her. That was all she thought about for a while. Several hours later, Daphne studied herself in the mirror. She didn't look any different. Well, actually, she glowed. It wasn't just the makeup and the lovely pink crinkle dress, or even the tiny grey fascinator, which she'd pinned with more ease than she expected onto her hair. Her lips were pretty pink with the smudge-free lipstick that Billy had assured her she wouldn't get on her teeth or Rex's shirt. She laughed at the fact there was a reasonable chance of that. But maybe Billy had been doubly right. She looked again. It was her eyes. They seemed brighter, even wicked, definitely more confident and able to meet coiffed women with aplomb. Maybe she had slain that ghost of shyness. These were not the eyes of a woman who couldn't hold her own, she assured herself. She thought about last night, this morning, even playing footsies at breakfast. Life was pretty darn good, and she had the sneaking suspicion she was in love, as opposed to in lust, with Rex. Though it would be reasonable to say she was in lust with him too. Excitement fizzed in her belly, and she couldn't remember ever being this happy. One more tweak of her hat, and she picked up her matching bag and sailed out the door. Her new lover's eyes lit up and then darkened when he saw her, and she could feel the blush heating her cheeks. She refused to be embarrassed and twirled in front of him. He slid his hand into hers and pulled her against him gently so he could kiss her, then stepped back. "Maybe I shouldn't muck up your lipstick." "Billy assures me it's non-smudge." "God bless Billy, then," he said, and kissed her thoroughly. Afterwards, she stood back and surveyed him, then wiped the tiniest hint of colour off his lips. Rex looked very dapper with his white RM shirt and fawn trousers, Even the riding boots were polished and looked perfect. Lord, she was lucky. She couldn't wait to see him with the black akubra he carried in one hand. "You're a stylish man when you decide to dress up." "Oh, shucks." It seemed Rex didn't have any problems taking a compliment. To her delight, he added a snippet of personal history, something she'd heard more of in this one trip than in all of the last 6 months. "My mother used to sew all the time when my father was away. She'd make clothes for people. School uniforms for kids and me, of course. I was an only child. I guess I think of her when I buy a new shirt because I tend to choose the ones that would make her smile." "Well, you both have good taste." "I'll take you to meet her. She doesn't get around as well as she did, and she lives in a unit in the retirement village. But she still sews." "I'd like to meet her, Rex." "It's on the list," he said cryptically. Then he glanced at his watch and took her arm. "Let's go to the races." 15 minutes later, when they arrived at the track, the picnic tables under shade sails beside the track were filling fast. The throng had the full spectrum of fashion, from jeans, shorts and thongs on feet, summer shifts vying with designer outfits and Sunday best, as people streamed in the gate. Hats were everywhere. She nudged Rex and pointed out a face they both knew. The big man had a beer in his hand already, and it was barely 11 o'clock. Daphne couldn't see how his reattached finger looked from here, but he seemed to have 5. Rex leaned down. "We'll stay away from accidental, Al." They turned the other way. No work today. Designated driver buses spilled their cargo of happy racegoers, and Daphne looked around with unexpected enjoyment. "Great, isn't it?" Rex was watching her face. "It is," she answered, admiring a young woman in a bright yellow sundress and purple accessories. It was the smile and joy in life that shone from her happy face that completed the picture. "She'll win." "Fashion in the field?" "Perfect." "You look perfect. You should go in it." Daphne raised her brows. "I would rather have all my teeth removed without anesthetic." Rex laughed. "Okay, then." He chuckled again. "I won't ask again." "You should go in it. Now that I would enjoy." "Give me the chair at the dentist next to you," he said fervently, and took her hand and squeezed it. After 4 races and the crowning of Daphne's pick for fashions on the field, the mood on the course had risen to new heights as the runners in the cup surged into the mounting yard. Brightly coloured jockeys bounced and leaned to their horses' heads, and the crowd drifted to the rails to admire their chosen contenders. It was slightly tricky on the uneven, dusty ground for those in high heels, but the men were up to the task of steadying their ladies. Rex's arm was solidly around Daphne. Rex's horse stamped her feet, and Daphne's bet seemed to have a smile in his equine eyes that resonated with Daphne's own feeling of euphoria. Then the horses were out on the track, trotting towards the starting post, and anticipation raised the swell of voices from the crowd again. The racegoers drifted back towards the trackside viewpoints, and the tension increased as the race caller's voice announced the field was almost ready. There was a small hold-up at the starting gates, and people became more desperate to see over the heads of others. Groups of young men were clustered, some with the serious faces of those who had plunged too heavily on this heady but precarious way of making money, and others were climbing onto low walls to see. Daphne soaked in the thrill, lost Rex's arm for a moment as he bent down to pick up a hat that had blown off a woman's head and returned it to her, and heard a tinkle of breaking glass from behind her, just as the gate bell clanged. They were off. The horses bounded from their starting gates, but Daphne turned in the opposite direction to the rest of the crowd in time to see a young man, late teens, standing by himself at the back of the wall, the remains of his beer glass falling at his feet. He was holding his wrist in a useless attempt to stop the blood that was spurting through his clutching fingers, and crumpled in a faint just as Daphne reached his side. She put out her arms, not silly enough to take all his weight, but to slow his descent to the ground. Unfortunately, the arc of crimson blood sprayed her face and neck, and she wiped her cheek with her arm as she reached over and clamped her fingers around the jagged tear in the flesh of his wrist. She had to blink through the film of blood that dripped off her forehead and hoped he hadn't given her any blood-borne diseases. The blood was still pumping out. This was serious. She was just about to call Rex when she realized he was already by her side, his face creased in concern. "I can't let go. Take his tie off. I need a tourniquet," she said, as the blood welled and splattered beneath her hand, and she wondered just how much more blood the boy would lose before they could contain it. Rex slid the tie up the young man's arm above the elbow and tightened it. The flow of blood lessened, and Daphne allowed her death grip on his arm to loosen. She wadded the handkerchief poking out of the jacket under her fingers across the wound and checked her watch. Tourniquet on at 3:36. A woman screamed and pointed, not at the white-faced young man on the ground, but at the blood-spattered spectre of a woman beside him. Her? Bloody hell. People began to crowd around. She heard a whir as the camera clicked. She ignored the blush of colour heating her face, ignored the mumble of horrified onlookers. She could imagine the gore and the gossip. She simply waited, with her hands pressing down on the wound to stem the flow, and shut the thought of how she must look away for later, when no doubt she would wallow in it miserably. The people staring at her didn't matter. "I'll call an ambulance. He'll need surgery." She nodded thankfully at Rex, and he pulled out his mobile phone just as the coarse paramedic arrived. The next 10 minutes passed quickly, and Daphne was handed a damp towel by a coarse official who thanked her profusely for saving the boy's life, but couldn't help his look of revulsion at the mess she was in. Rex took the towel from her and wiped her face and neck, then produced a light raincoat from somewhere that covered the rest of her, and she could have kissed him. He helped her to her feet, took her across to a tap, and washed some of the blood off her hands and dried them. She felt like a baby, but for some strange reason her mind wasn't functioning at that moment. Luckily, Rex's was. He ushered her towards the car, past curious onlookers, and she watched the ground in front as she was led away. She'd done it again, been a magnet for drama and mess and social awkwardness, and all in front of Rex. He was stuck with a blood-soaked robot when he should have been enjoying himself. Though, now she thought about it, thank goodness it had happened in front of Rex. "Thanks, Rex, for being there," she said, her voice a faint whisper. "I think that young man should thank you for being there. I'd say he would have died if that lot had been responsible for saving him." A few minutes later, they pulled up at the pub, and she leaned with post-adrenaline weariness back in the seat until he opened her door. "Come on, Florence Nightingale, upstairs and into the shower." He took her arm gently and even prized her key from her shaking, bloodied fingers and opened her door. He urged her in, turned back and closed the door to the corridor, then led her past the huge mural on the wall of her room through to the bathroom and turned on the shower. There, he helped her strip off until her lovely dress was a ruined heap on the shower floor, and tenderly pushed her in. The blood ran from her hair and her arms in a crimson whirlpool that splashed against the white tiles before it twirled down the drain. It had even soaked through into her bra. She unclipped it and dropped the messy lace confection into the swirl of bloody water on the floor of the shower stall. Rex coughed. How had she forgotten Rex? Her head jerked up, and then Rex whistled. She had to grin sheepishly at that. She slid another peek at him and suddenly realized it was okay. This was Rex. His eyes were filled with caring and pride, and a suggestion he was trying to be good and not look at her in a predatory way. That made the beginnings of a smile lift her lips. She looked down then at her saturated, lacy underwear and back at Rex. Then timid, demure Daphne slid her hands over her hips and made a show of removing her panties, burlesque style. And that was too much for him. She started to laugh as he removed his own blood-splattered clothes and stepped in. Chapter 18. A new Daphne returned on Sunday after lunch, and Billy grinned at the sight of her. She couldn't help feeling a little envious of her friend's obvious glow of happiness, but it was so good to see Daphne, head held high and happy, and Rex handing her out of the car like she was a fragile china doll. Fragile? Daphne, who could throw herself headlong into the most traumatic and tense situation and take control of disaster with aplomb. "You look fabulous, Daphne," Billy said. Daphne rolled her eyes at her companion. "How do you think Rex looks?" "Pretty damn good." Rex laughed. "I have to go before I start blushing." He kissed Daphne's lips, softly but passionately. Billy's eyebrows rose, and she looked away. It seemed all had gone well, and she couldn't wait to hear Daphne's side of it. Finally, Rex reluctantly climbed back into his car, and Daphne was waving. Billy waved too, and they stood together and watched his dust go down the driveway. "So it's like that, is it?" "Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness, yes." Daphne turned a dreamy face to Billy and sighed. "He's wonderful." Then her brows drew together. "What's been happening here?" Wow. How could Daphne tell anything was wrong, especially when she'd just been floating on cloud 9? "Let's enjoy your story first." "Mine can wait. It has a good ending." Daphne looked Billy up and down. "Something's worrying you." So she told her about Lorna, about Morgan's assessment agreeing with her own, about Lachlan's concern, and the slight improvement they could all see today. "So it looks like it was a urinary tract infection that set her off. But Lorna's taking it hard. She says she doesn't want to be a burden, that she'll go quietly into an aged care facility before she does something silly. I can't seem to change her mind." Billy felt better, even though Daphne said, "I can't see an answer we can act on right now, except allowing her some time. Maybe we take it day by day. It's Mia's birthday tea tomorrow night. Lorna can't go before that. And we're working all week." Billy nodded. Day by day sounds at least like a plan. "I guess we could all just refuse to take her anywhere, and she'd have to stay here." A path of subtle resistance. If they worked together, between the four of them, with all that women power, they could work it out. "It's good to have you back, Daphne." Billy hugged her impulsively. "And now I'm dying to hear about your weekend." Yesterday had been Mia's 17th birthday. It fell on the Monday and had been the best one yet. No stinking bus trip home because her mother had finished work early to take her for her driver's test. Soretta had told her not to be stupid and just concentrate when the assessor asked her to drive places. Lorna had kissed her on the cheek and wished her well. Daphne had bought her a new wallet to hold the license when she got it. And her mum had a surprise for afterwards. Even a day later, Mia couldn't forget that feeling of walking away from the motor registry after the harrowing experience of the test, with her photograph on her new provisional driver's license. It had to be one of the most exhilarating moments of her life. Then her mother had taken her to the one used car yard, and she still couldn't believe she was sitting behind the wheel of her own sporty red utility with the music she wanted to play blasting out of the iPod dock, driving home from school on a Tuesday. Her little red baby had a few dings and a couple of rattles, but it was streets better than the cute yellow compact sedan her mother had fancied for her. Mia patted the dash with proprietary pleasure. This pint-sized workhorse, with its useful tray in the back, towing bar, and bucket seats in the front, had caught her eye. She loved the shiny silver rhubarb and the big sporty headlights, and the fact that she could go off-road if she wanted to. She felt like she could conquer the world in this. She grinned at herself in the mirror. And hadn't Trent been impressed when she'd driven it to school this morning? Her chest tightened with pleasure. This beat riding in the bus hands down, and she still couldn't believe her mother had let her have her wings. Trent was coming out on the weekend, and they'd do some off-road driving over the property and check fences for Soretta. She glanced at the speedometer and made sure she was below the speed limit. She was not going to do anything to jeopardize this freedom. Then she saw the old American muscle car that belonged to the farm worker, Joseph. He was standing beside the road with the bonnet up on his car, and he looked like he needed help. She hesitated. Soretta had said to stay away from him, and she would be very happy to do so, but she couldn't just drive past, particularly as she was on her way home. She put her blinker on and slowed to turn into the small lay-by and rolled her utility to a stop. Mia wound down the window as he walked towards her. He had a strange smile on his face, and she had the sudden instinct that she wasn't safe. "Hi, can I do anything to help?" "Mia, how nice." He smiled that creepy smile again. "A lift back to the station would be helpful, to pick up some oil, if that's not too much trouble. I'll just lock the car up." He took his time while Mia sweltered waiting for him, but she didn't want to get out. Then he walked around to the other side and opened the passenger side door. She didn't want to look at him as he was getting in, and as soon as he put his seatbelt on, she drew out onto the road again. "Nice little rig." "Yes." "Mum buy it for you?" "It was my birthday yesterday." "Yesterday, eh? Happy birthday." There was something very strange in his voice. She knew he was staring at her, but she didn't turn her head. She kept her eyes glued to the road, but she could feel the heat in her cheeks and wished he'd turn away. She felt like saying, "Can you stop looking at me, please?" But she didn't, so she reached down and turned the iPod player back on. Finally, he swiveled to look out the window, and she let out a relieved breath. It was only another 5 kilometres home, and she could ignore him for that long. He reached over and turned the music down. "Hope you don't mind. Thought we could have a chat." She did mind, and chatting to him was the last thing she wanted to do. She wished she'd pretended she hadn't seen him and sailed past his broken-down car. Stinker. Sure, she said, refusing to offer anything. So, where did you and your mum live before here? She hesitated, but there weren't a lot of choices. Sydney? She didn't know why she kept it so brief, but she did. Before he could ask her to be more specific, she said, "Where did you live?" Not that she was interested. 3 kilometres to go. I came across from Adelaide. What about your dad? Was he from Sydney too? My dad died when I was born. 2.5 kilometres. Really? Patent disbelief. Now she was getting cross. Yes, really. 2 kilometres. Seriously, if there'd been a long way to go, she would have stopped the car and asked him to get out. Did you like it? If she kept asking him questions, she wouldn't have to answer any herself. What? Adelaide. Seriously, if he wanted her to talk to him, he should at least listen. Adelaide was okay. So, just you and your mum? Yep. Subject change. Have you seen that lamb I put back with the mob lately? Nope. They all look the same to me. She bet they did. She'd been able to tell he wasn't really an animal person. And thankfully, there was the gate up ahead. She put her blinker on and drove across the cattle grid and up the driveway, careful not to stir up the dust and dirty her baby. Halfway up, he said, "Just drop me here. I'll walk across the paddock to the shed, that's fine. I was supposed to help with the muster." She stopped, very happy with that suggestion. Thanks for the ride. He got out and closed the door softly, then waved. She half waved back with relief as she drove away. She was probably being silly. She saw Lorna sitting on the veranda, and the elderly lady still had that sad expression on her face. It just wasn't the old Lorna. She decided then and there that she would try even harder to cheer her up. After she'd parked her baby in the shed, she took the veranda steps 2 at a time and plopped herself down on the seat beside Lorna. Hello. How is my favourite person today? Lorna smiled wearily. Now that's a lie. I know you idolise Soretta. Mia pretended to look around furtively. For goodness sake, don't tell her that. She'll be even harder on me than she is. Lorna almost smiled. A bit of hard work never hurt anyone. But your secret is safe with me. Lorna looked a bit brighter. So, how's your new car going? She frowned. And why did you stop on the driveway? I couldn't see that far. The new farm worker broke down, and I gave him a lift home. He got out and walked across the paddock. Is he nice? Mia was in a dilemma. If she said no, then Lorna would worry. If she said yes, it would be lying. But Lorna would let the subject drop. He's okay. What have you been doing today? Sitting here. It's what old ladies do. Big sigh. They sit and rock all day. Mia lifted her brows. So you don't even need a rocking chair to rock? Despite herself, Lorna's mouth twitched. Minx. She grimaced. That did sound self-indulgent, didn't it? She checked her surroundings before lowering her voice. Lachlan and Soretta have been taking it in turns to mind me and have only just left together to go over to the sheep yards because they knew you'd be home any minute. I hate that I'm a nuisance. You're not a nuisance. How about I mind you now and you can help me with my homework? If we get it wrong, we can just say it was your fault. This time Lorna laughed out loud, and Mia felt the warmth of affection growing in her chest. She really was becoming fond of this pseudo-granny they'd adopted, and it was sad to see her so down on herself. We need to update our web page too. Lorna would love this, and she'd been meaning to tell her since she'd found out this morning. I had a look at the PayPal account that goes straight into the FDS fund, and we've hit our first $1,000. We got an email from the director to thank us. Lorna brightened visibly. $1,000? Awe spilled from her voice. For auctioning a photo of Dr. Morgan? She smiled the best smile Mia had seen since she'd come back from the gymkhana with Soretta on Sunday. Mia nodded. And we have 800 likes on the website. 200 on your photos on the camel. You wicked child. Lorna stood up and waited until she was steady before she moved. I'll be back. She waggled her finger at Mia. Don't go away. I'll just have a look and see what other photos we have. And you can put them up. She turned away with purpose, and Mia could hear her muttering to herself. $1,000 for the flying doctor. Now that's wonderful. The dog started barking, and Mia looked up to see Daphne's car climbing the hill to the house. There wasn't much dust because of how slowly she was driving, but Mia knew Daphne could gun it down the hill if she needed to get to town fast. Lorna wasn't the only one she was appreciating more each day, too. Mia remembered how Soretta had described Daphne's heroic actions the day she'd saved Lachlan's life, and that was just one instance in a year filled with rescue missions that the flying doctors attended each year. She found herself more invested with Lorna's fundraising for a cause that deserved the support of everyone in Australia. And this was what her mother did. Indeed, all the women in the house were inspiring, not the least her own mother, now that she was being forced to look at her through the eyes of the other women. Soretta had given her a huge lecture when she'd said something disparaging about her mother's ability to be busy all the time, and that had resonated with an uncomfortable perception that she hadn't made it easy for her mum in the past. In fact, she had the sneaking suspicion that she'd been a brat and vowed to make it up to her. Soretta hadn't ever known her mother. Her gran had apparently been the maternal support, but then Soretta had lost her as well. Mia was beginning to appreciate just how lucky she'd been to have had her mother all her life. And it was about time she stopped focusing on the fact that she didn't have a father. Though she was close to her granddad, Soretta didn't have one of those either. Daphne arrived on the veranda carrying 2 bags of groceries. Mia stood up. Sorry, didn't see you've been shopping. She took one bag from her and opened the door with her other hand. Thank you, Mia, Daphne said. What were you doing, sitting there all by yourself? Lorna's gone to get some more photos, and we're going to update the web page. Daphne stopped and studied her. How is she? Okay. Not a lie. That's good then. Your mother was worried. We all are. She smiled. How did your car go on the way and back from school? Better than the bus? Mia laughed. Just a bit. She didn't mention Joseph to Daphne either. She might later. They put the groceries away together and Daphne lifted the lid on the beef and mushrooms she'd had simmering all day. The aroma filled the room and Mia's tummy rumbled so loudly Daphne laughed. We could have a taste now, if you like. Which was how Lorna caught them spooning a small serve of beef bourguignon into 2 saucers. Aha, Lorna said. Do you realise that Lachlan and I have had to inhale that aroma all day and not lift the lid? Daphne reached for another saucer. "Shh," she said, and ladled a scoop out for Lorna and handed her a spoon. The three of them tasted and sighed with unanimous pleasure. This will tide us over until they all come in at tea time. Over the hill at the yards, Soretta wiped the sweat from her forehead. She paused in thinking about paddocks and sheep rotation and watched the new man, Joseph, herd the sheep, and she could see that he seemed to have the knack for keeping them in line. He'd come in later than expected with some car trouble, and she had to admit it was easier now that he was here. She still wasn't sure if they wanted to keep him. Grandad didn't seem to mind the man. Apparently he knew a bit about metal detecting, and they'd had quite an animated conversation about the pros and cons of finding precious metals with different kinds of devices. It wasn't like she had to deal with him socially, because he seemed to like keeping to himself. She didn't think he'd been to the house once since the first day she'd interviewed him. She let the thoughts go. They were nearly finished anyway. She wanted to separate the younger ewes and lambs from this mob and move them to the best of the minimal feed that was left. If it didn't rain decently soon, they might still have to sell half of the mob. Klaus was working on the other side with the dogs, and her grandfather was working the gates. She'd heard Mia come home, so there was no rush to get back to Lorna. Apart from being quieter than usual, she thought Lorna was pretty good today. Her grandfather had shared some of his experiences on Saturday, and she'd seen he'd been genuinely upset at Lorna's distress. It must have been disturbing for everyone, and she was somewhat glad she and Mia had missed all the drama. She looked across at the man opening the gates. Her granddad seemed happier now, and being back with the sheep was good for him, especially since they'd had another few mils of rain last night. There'd been no more silly talk of selling Blue Hills. "That all of them?" She heard her granddad's voice, and she snapped back into sheep mode. Saw that he was right. "Yep." The younger ewes were in the left yard and the older in the right. "We'll take the younger ones up first." Her grandfather opened the left gate, and the milling sheep streamed out. Klaus climbed onto the four-wheeler and was onto them, with the dogs circling the pack, and the mob started up the hill towards the new paddock. It would take at least an hour to walk them there, but he'd return more quickly. "Going back to their house?" Her grandfather had crossed the yards and appeared beside her. She smiled up at him. It was so good to see he had his spring back. "I'll just wait till the mob get through the first gate, and then I'll let this lot out." He touched her shoulder. "Joseph can do that. Why don't you come back to the house a bit earlier than usual? You could join us for tea on the veranda. Everyone's home tonight for a change." She laughed. "You sound like you're getting used to the new extended family." "Yes. Well, I like that they've taken at least some of the load off you." He patted her shoulder again. "And you're happier too. And yes," he shrugged, "I like them all. A lot." Impulsively, she hugged him. "And they even pay to stay here." "Can't say that's been a bad aspect. Come on, my little businesswoman. Delegate the work and come back with me." There wasn't a way to say no to that, and she didn't want to. Chapter 19. The following Friday at the base was one of those silly days that never seemed to end. A cook on one of the muster camps slipped on a pumpkin peel and split the back of his scalp open. They'd had to fly him out to Broken Hill for an overnight stay in the high dependency ward. A 6-year-old boy on a remote farm had burned himself playing with matches in the shed, and been lucky not to be trapped in the burning building. Morgan had taken that message and sent her out with Daphne. She'd shuddered at the close call as they'd transferred the boy to Adelaide. It had always been her worst nightmare that Mia would leave a candle burning or play with matches. Morgan must have seen her distress because he'd been very gentle with her when she returned. Then, a 3-year-old girl almost drowned in a trough and needed to be monitored overnight in hospital after her parents resuscitated her. Daphne had gone alone on that call, but Billy had been on tenterhooks until they arrived back with the good news. Billy's shoulders felt stiff from the tension, and she caught Morgan assessing her as she rolled her shoulders. She knew she was emotionally drained from the phone calls, and her heart went out to the people who had actually had to deal with the events as they happened, let alone Daphne, who had flown out and retrieved most of the wounded. When she came in from the last flight, Daphne's shoulders were bowed, and her face shone pale in the afternoon sunlight. Plus, she was on call again that night, so she'd planned to stay in town at the old townhouse. Rex followed her, telling Morgan that he was taking her home to his place for a bit of spoiling. They can ring her there. Billy decided there was a "don't ring her there" in his voice, and watched with a touch of wistfulness as they waved goodbye. Daphne even winked. Billy's lips twitched. It was so good to see. Mia was staying over at Trent's parents', a lovely couple who had come out one day to Blue Hills for afternoon tea, and everyone had liked them. Now, with Daphne away, the numbers would be down at home tonight. She checked her computer screen, straightened her back off the chair and stretched, then glanced again at the clock. Another hour and a half until she knocked off. "Would you like to come back to my place for tea tonight?" Morgan had come up behind her, where she was sitting, and she jumped. That made her cross. Normally she could feel when he was near. An indication of how drained she felt today. "Because you feel sorry for me?" He raised his eyebrows. "I don't feel sorry for you." "Well, you should," she said unreasonably, and to make it more annoying, he smiled. "Cranky pants?" "And you're not getting into them." Thankfully, she didn't say that out loud, but even in her thoughts, the words didn't have much conviction. "Sorry." He put his hands on her shoulders and squeezed once, then stepped back as though the action was out of bounds. "If you come back to my house, I'll massage your shoulders." OMG. Not an opportunity a single lady like herself could possibly pass up. Nobody rubbed her shoulders, and today was the perfect day to be spoiled a little. "You're on." An hour and a half later, she drove into Morgan's spare car space. She'd rung Lorna to tell her not to save her a plate for tea. There had been an inquisitive archness in Lorna's comment, and she smiled at the memory. Lorna was getting better. Thank goodness for that, and she hadn't mentioned leaving for 24 hours now. Billy stopped and waited for Morgan to unlock the door. Now that she was here, she felt a little self-conscious as she preceded him past the front door and into the lounge room. They hadn't discussed their sunset jaunt at the station, and apart from the occasional tension when she found Morgan watching her at work, their relationship had remained tenuous. Until today. Why today? She stopped in the middle of the room and tried to think of something to say apart from, "So when are you going to rub my shoulders, and do I have to take my top off?" "It's nice and cool in here." The sliding curtains were open and the afternoon sun was still high, but the tinting on the windows kept the temperature down substantially from what it was outside. "The air conditioner is on a timer. It came on at 5 p.m. One of the things I love about this flat." Ah, there goes my tinted window theory. I was going to tint my windows if I finally bought a house. What was with her sudden need to fill the room with words? He put his hands on her shoulders and gently pushed her down into a seat. Hold that thought. I'll just change and be back in a flash. She raised her brows, looked up at him, hovering over her while he waited for her response. She fought against the feeling of being small and fragile. Pretending she was very relaxed, she managed to make a joke. You gonna come back and flash me? He shot her a grin. It could be arranged. She had a sudden vision of him doing just that. No thanks. Too much of a good thing and all that? He nodded sagely. I can see how it could be. Then he was gone, and she sagged back in the chair as if someone had untied the knot of her internal balloon. Crikey, she muttered. Maybe she'd asked for one of those manly T-shirts he seemed to have in abundance to change into herself and get out of her uniform. It would probably smell fabulous. Then he was back, and she forgot what she'd been thinking. He had on one of those shirts she wouldn't mind sniffing, beneath which a nice expanse of torso rippled and tightened like the sensations in her belly. His strong legs extended from loose shorts, and his quite beautiful feet were bare. She resisted the impulse to fan her face. Apparently the air conditioner had stopped working. He put out a hand to help her up, and her fingers were lost in his. Up she sailed. Talk about a roller coaster of sensations. Come through to the kitchen. Sorry I keep leaving you while I change. He shrugged those truly delightful shoulders. Maybe I've lived too long on my own and have a routine. He smiled ruefully at her. I like to strip off work with my clothes. She could picture that. She followed like she was on a string and sat on the low-backed stool at the breakfast bar that he pulled out for her. Maybe she should say something. I might have to leave a sarong in my glove box if we keep doing this. She glanced down at her work trousers. I'm at a disadvantage. He looked her over. Believe me, you're not at any disadvantage. The tone of his voice made the room feel even warmer. Her cheeks must have hinted at this because he turned to the fridge and brought out a bottle of juice. Would you like a cool drink? Thank you. He poured her a glass, half of one for himself that he downed in seconds, and then put the bottle back in the fridge. He studied her. You do look a little shell-shocked from the day. Let me have a go at those shoulders. She put the glass down before she fumbled it and watched, mesmerized, as he walked round the bench, then behind her until she couldn't see him. But she could feel him hovering there. So she dropped her head and waited, felt the whisper of air just before he touched her, and shivered. When his hands did settle on the apex of each shoulder, she tried not to tense, forced herself to breathe out and droop as his fingers slid slowly along the fabric of her shirt. If you took off your shirt, I could use some oil. No, she said in an almost strangled voice. That's fine. He didn't say anything else, and she tried to relax again. Gradually, as he dug his fingers in gently through her shirt, and then with more firmness, she couldn't help the sag as magic fingers began to work on releasing the tension. An involuntary groan escaped as he kneaded a particularly tense section above her left shoulder blade, and he slowed, dug deeper, around and around and around, slow and rhythmic, like his tongue had been. That insidious thought jerked her back to a semblance of alertness, but too soon she melted like chocolate on the chair again, lost in a cloud of physical sensation. "You have beautiful shoulders," he murmured. "I like your hands," she muttered thickly. She heard him chuckle. His big hands slid over and up and along, always moving, never stopping the pressure, so that she was happy just to soak it in for as long as he could keep going. "Is this okay?" "Yes," the words slipping out on a sigh, like she was threatening to slip off the chair. She could hear the smile in his voice. "Thank you. I'm thinking I could ask you anything, and you'd say yes at the moment." Yes. He laughed. "Then I'd better stop, because I'd like to have a serious conversation with you." She opened her eyes slowly, turned her head and watched him walk around the breakfast bar, that lithe, easy movement of his a pleasure to watch. He washed his hands and dried them before he opened the refrigerator and lifted out some cheese and olives. "I'd better feed you first." Out came an open packet of tiny, crispy Italian bread bites. Massage, then food. She had no issue with that. "Can I do something to help?" "Nope. Just relax." And enjoy the view. This guy could really tick the boxes if she let him. And that was the problem. Could she let him? Or would they both retreat if she did? These were all good questions that she realized she would have to answer soon. His tone was serious. "The more I get to know you, the more I want to know." Her shoulders felt so good. There's nothing to tell. Except she loved the way his hands worked. It came out of nowhere and she wasn't prepared. "Tell me about the man who was Mia's father." "Sorry?" "Mia's father?" The room became suddenly claustrophobic. What about him? What was he like? What could she say? Nice one minute, an emotional blackmailer the next? Hard work, and in the end, too hard to stay around. So, an amicable separation? Amicable? The hard lump of a sarcastic snort lodged in her chest. She'd escaped in the night and never looked back. Just the little issue of Mia thinking he was dead. "Why are you asking this?" "I want to know." "Why?" Because she didn't want to talk about it. He looked at her, and she could tell he was turning cold, but she couldn't help that, and she got it now that she wasn't good at sharing stuff. So she was shutting him out because she didn't want to go there. They could be friends, maybe lovers, but she didn't want to be accountable to any man, and that included talking about her past because he felt he had a right to know. He didn't have that right. She'd managed this on her own for 17 years, and she could manage for the next 17. No guilt. Well, maybe some guilt, but she didn't need to be reminded about it. "I have this feeling I'm missing something. Something I should know." She should probably tell him. She told Lorna and Daphne a bit. Not the lot. Why couldn't she tell Morgan? "Nothing you should know. Very boring." She looked at the slate of the kitchen island bench, suddenly fascinated by the swirls of different coloured minerals. "Billy? I just don't want to talk about it." She could feel the wall growing like Jack's beanstalk, shooting up between them. She had the suspicion he was watching it grow too. He said unexpectedly, "When my fiancé left me standing at the front of that church, I discovered things that I could have helped her with, if only she'd let me. But she shut me out. He ran his hand through his hair. Maybe we could have saved the trauma of her imploding and running away if I'd known more about her life before we met. I don't want to make that same mistake. I'm sorry. There's nothing to tell. They both knew she was lying. She looked around for her handbag. He'd gone ahead and ruined the night. Or they both had. She stood up. Thanks for the massage. You don't have to go. I was going to make dinner. I can't give you what you want, Morgan. It's not hard. Just talk to me. If you need protection, I can do that. What did he know? He couldn't know. Nobody knew. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't shut me out, Billy. She found her keys. I'll see you tomorrow. All the way home she was asking herself why she couldn't have just told him the facts and admitted she'd made a mistake that had resulted in Mia thinking her father was dead. This is the end of CD 8. The book continues on CD 9. CD 9. Chapter 20. The next evening, everyone was waiting for the rain to come. The previous night, they'd had a sprinkle so light it had only made Soretta kick the dirt as she went across to check the troughs. Not fair, Soretta thought. It was raining so much in Adelaide that they'd called off the cricket, and that was only 4 hours away. It had looked promising all day, but the disappointing and dry electrical storms set everyone's teeth on edge. Then they'd heard that an hour and a half across the border they'd had a deluge. So far there was none at Blue Hills. The heat increased the pall of anxiety in the homestead, and the air seemed to palpate with tension. Grandad looked as edgy as she felt as they watched the sky because the house water tank was almost empty. He'd gone into town to order another tank just in case the heavens opened, which they had the money to do now, and Klaus had started up the old bulldozer and scraped the empty dam another few feet deeper in case they had a deluge they could capture. Billy had offered to pay the water carrier to bring a load for the house, but it wasn't just the house that needed water. Soretta was praying the water table they were using from the bores to keep the stock alive would hold up. They'd certainly given it a run over the last months. She knew everyone felt it was so close to rain that the waiting was torture, made worse by hearing that it was raining everywhere else. She glanced across at Daphne, who looked jumpy. Soretta knew she was on call tonight, but knowing Daphne, she'd be more worried about Rex than herself, flying with thunder and cumulonimbus everywhere. Lorna had started talking about moving out to a retirement village to save water now, because one less person using the tank might help. And to top it off, Mia had let slip she'd picked up Joseph, and how uncomfortable she was every time he spoke to her. Of course, she'd instantly fired him. And maybe she had been a bit harsh when she'd told her off for not saying anything earlier. Another rumble of far-off thunder reverberated through Soretta's nerves, and the whole house simmered with the strain. An hour later, Billy wandered outside. The clouds had slipped away again, and the air hung still as the scorching afternoon sun hit the top of the gum tree outside the back door before it plummeted behind the hills. Billy needed air, a release. And then she heard that bird she and Daphne hadn't been able to identify and jumped on the excuse to be diverted. Finally, she saw it, sitting at the top of the tree, singing exuberantly to its intended mate, and she pointed the video on her phone to capture it for proof. They'd be able to have a good look later when she Googled it, and the birdsong would help. Another movement caught her eye, and she blinked, discerned the outline of a man walking towards her across the yard, but the sun was in her eyes, and she shaded them. Adrenaline tingled her skin and whipped her head up. Jock. After all these years, as if she'd conjured him by all the thoughts she'd been having lately. So he'd found them. Her heart sank, almost with relief. At least she wouldn't have to worry anymore. Then he spoke softly. "Do you have a secret, Williamina?" Deceptively mild, the words floated in the hot air with a hint of derisive amusement. All she could think about was the whereabouts of Mia, whether it was at all possible to keep her daughter out of sight from this man. He stepped out from behind the bush, and his classic good looks, far from attracting her, made her physically wince at her own stupidity. She couldn't believe she'd ever been so blind not to see through him. She knew what that full mouth hid, how those eyes were constantly sizing up what could be used to his advantage. A man who had started from a privileged family, had burned chance after chance until his family had cut him adrift, had lost job after job, never able to see anything good, could only inhabit the negative world he created for himself and his status as a victim of that world. She didn't know what had happened in his past to form him that way, but she knew nobody could help him until he woke up to himself. She'd chosen not to let him spoil her life like he'd destroyed his own. Years of dissolute living had left marks on his face. There were traces of weakness he couldn't hide behind his white teeth. Her voice stark. "How did you find me?" "Honey, I've been here for a week. Just didn't know it was you over here at the homestead." His voice purred. Pure divine intervention. Hardly divine. Luck, then. He shrugged and smiled lazily. Confident now, he held all the power. "I met a man in a pub." "Your whole life begins and ends in a pub." He stepped closer. "Nasty. But in this case, I'm delighted I met that particular man in a pub. Not only did he suggest I do some prospecting up here, but I found you as well. My dear old girlfriend. Ex." He ignored her comment. "Not only have I found my girlfriend, but I've found out she's a mother." She jumped. "You're a mother, aren't you, Williamina? The mother of my daughter. Such a sweet girl. Exactly the right age to mean she's mine, as her birthday was last week." Her heart sank. "You've spoken to her?" He laughed, and it chilled Billy's soul. "Her? Still afraid to say her name to her rightful father?" He smirked at her. "Yes, my daughter Mia." "You're not her father." More smirk. "I think the mirror might tell you differently." She lifted her head and spoke evenly. "You lost any chance when you threatened me, when you turned into a man I couldn't trust." His eyes flashed, and she saw the glint of him turning, and it was as plain to see as a bolt of lightning illuminating a dead tree. "I was drunk. You got it wrong." He'd always been the victim, Billy thought. It was always everyone else's fault, except his, that his life wasn't what he wanted it to be. Billy had moved on, but she wouldn't forget those seams of narcissism and violence that could never be cured by anyone but himself. She almost felt sorry for him, but not quite. She'd hoped her daughter would be spared this exposure, but it seemed it wasn't to be. Finally, she could accept that it had to happen one day, that she couldn't protect Mia forever from the truth. All she could do was hope Mia was grown up enough to understand why she had excluded him from both their lives. "Don't you think I should be introduced to my daughter?" Footsteps fell behind her, and she knew with sickening despair who it would be. "Mum?" Mia looked between the two of them. "What's Joseph doing here? Soretta fired him." "His name's Jock." "Ah, the princess." Jock smiled. "Your mother knew me as Jock." Billy wanted to slap him for the hurt he would cause Mia, but anything she said would only incite him more. He went on, "Oh, yes, I'm leaving. Now I've found the person I've been looking for." Mia looked from one to the other. "What do you mean?" "Your mother." He gestured grandly towards Billy. "My old girlfriend." Billy shook her head. "I walked away from you years ago." "You ran away?" "Yep." Fatalistically, Billy said what she should have told her daughter. "As far and fast as I could." Mia was staring at them in shock. "And me?" He laughed, held out his hands. "You're my daughter." She looked at Billy with a world of hurt in her eyes. "My father is dead." "Your father was dead," Jock laughed, "but now I'm alive." Mia threw another glance at Billy, pleading for her to dispute it. "Mum? Him? Is this true?" Mia was looking at her like she'd been stabbed, and Billy felt the pain slice into her heart. But the stakes were too high for this to come out the wrong way. She would win this battle no matter what. She lifted her chin. "Genetically, but never intentionally." Mia whispered, "All these years, you lied to me." Billy saw the hurt, winced at the damage she'd caused when all she'd wanted to do was protect her. Now she met her daughter's horrified eyes. "I made a mistake trusting him once. You don't need to make the same mistake." Mia gave her a long, hard look that made Billy cringe from the contempt it held, and then turned slowly towards Jock. Looked him up and down. For one horrible, interminable moment, Billy thought Mia was going to choose to go with him. Find out for herself. Jock smiled and held out his hands. "Come to Papa." Mia shook her head at her mother before saying, "You might have made a mistake, but what makes you think I would be so stupid?" Then to Jock, "Get out of our house and leave my mother alone." Billy was almost as shocked as Jock, but not quite. She saw his face change, saw the lack of control and rise of violence. She stepped forward and pulled Mia behind her, ignoring her resistance with a strength she didn't know she had. "Get inside." She pushed Mia towards the house before turning back to Jock. "And you, get out." There was steel in her voice. She would never be afraid of this man again. She realised, too bloody late, that it was only Mia's distress she'd ever worried about. And finally, she felt the load of guilt and shame and fear of the past fall away like a musty coat she'd been dying to strip off. Hopefully, she wouldn't pay the ultimate price for doing so. "Yes, get out!" Lorna's voice rang out over their heads. She stood on the veranda behind them, repeated Billy's words with barely a tremor in the voice that held all the authority of a woman who had faced greater danger than this before. Stupidly, he laughed. "Spare me." He looked at Lorna. "I'll come up there and push you over, you old bag. Then I'll sort out my—" He paused, shooting Billy a death look. "Family." "Really?" There was no feebleness in Lorna's response. "I'd like to see that. And I'd like to see you girls come back up here to me, please." Billy backed towards the step, her stomach hollow. 3 wasn't necessarily better against him, because now she would be responsible for Lorna as well. At least Mia, for once, did what she was told and scurried back up to Lorna. "Leave!" Lorna spoke again while they were moving, and Jock laughed. "What are you going to do about it, old woman?" He advanced towards the veranda, and his sudden menace glinted in the sunlight. Billy drew in her breath and shot a look at Lorna, who for some reason looked relieved. Lorna's voice was conversational. "Are you threatening us?" "Bloody oath I am," he growled, all pretense of humour gone from his voice. "Then I'll protect myself and those I love." She lifted the .410 shotgun and rested it on the rail. Jock laughed. "An old witch with a gun that would knock you on your back if you were stupid enough to fire it." "She won't fall over. I'm right here helping her." This was Daphne's voice. She stepped out of the shadows and hugged Mia into her. Soretta stepped into Lorna's other side. "And me." 5 women, 100 times stronger than the pathetic man in front of them. "Get out," said Daphne and Soretta together. Jock began to recognise the united steel. Billy looked down at him. "Leave. Never come back, or I will see you prosecuted to the full extent of the law." She picked up the phone and let out a sigh of relief that the bird video was still running. She waved the phone. "It's all recorded." She saw it sink in, saw the colour leave his face as he realised he was beaten. "Bitch!" He glared pure hatred, but it bounced off Billy now, fell harmlessly to the red soil at her feet like a handful of dry dirt that would blow away in the next breeze. Defeated, he turned away. Soretta pointed in the direction of the gate. "Get off our land!" None of them moved until they heard the sound of his car roar into life and the acceleration of anger down the driveway. Lorna broke the silence. "Oh, my," she said, and began to shake. Soretta stepped in and relieved her of the gun, and Daphne helped her sit down. Daphne swallowed and looked shudderingly at the firearm. "Is it loaded?" Lorna shook her head. "Didn't have time." Daphne and Billy's breath whooshed out in weak surprise, and Mia laughed. "I believed it was loaded," Mia said. "And he did too. But what would you have done?" Lorna patted her apron. Shotgun shells rattled in her pocket. "I have buckshot, loaded with salt. Wouldn't have hurt him, but it would have made a big bang. As if to underline her intent, a huge clap of thunder rattled the windows, and into the silence straight after came the plop, plop of the first few raindrops. Big drops, puffing little columns of dust into the air. Then a few more, and finally a steady patter. Then the heavens split open and it started to really rain, drilling holes into the dirt. Huge sheets of fresh, cool water that just got heavier and heavier and louder on the tin roof of the homestead until it drummed like 100 horses were stampeding across the roof. It took a few seconds for it to sink in, and then they all turned to stare. Soretta first, then Mia, and they clapped their hands and laughed out loud and stared disbelievingly as it continued to get heavier. Pathetic men in muscle cars were forgotten in the euphoria of a true rainstorm. This was steady, soaking, life-giving rain. A deluge getting heavier. Certainly tank-filling, dam-filling, solid rain, and the cracked and dry ground drank it thirstily as it went on and on. Oh my goodness! Billy grabbed Daphne and followed Soretta, who ran to the rail as the gutters started to overrun, and she leaned over and put her arms out so the water ran down her arms. Then she dashed out into the yard and danced under it. The water poured down her face in tiny rivers, and even through the water, Billy could see the stunned disbelief, and the incredulous relief, and the tears of joy. Billy watched Mia run after Soretta and start to jump up and down too. Laughing, her daughter's clothes quickly grew saturated and stuck to her. The muddy water splashed over her legs. Lorna laughed as well and tottered to the rail to grin and reach her hand out into the downpour. Oh, my goodness, indeed. Billy felt Daphne take her elbow, and they walked arm in arm to stand beside Lorna, grinning at the crazy girls dancing under the opening skies. And Billy realised that because of where she was, because of who she was with, and because of how they had all grown to be a family, she would never enjoy the start of a rainstorm as much as she was enjoying this moment. She tugged on Daphne's arm, took Lorna's thin fingers in hers, and the three women walked down the steps and out into the rain and laughed out loud. Lorna hadn't been this happy for a long time. The camaraderie, the sheer joy of watching these young women gleefully dance in the rain, their inclusion of her made her cheeks stretch and pull with pleasure. The love she felt lifted her heart, and she glanced up into the falling drops, and for a minute she thought she saw Wallace smiling down at her. Then the pain came from nowhere. One minute Lorna was grinning with the rest of them, and the next she staggered. She felt Billy's hand slip free as something in her chest crushed any chance of drawing a breath, and the fog wasn't the rain on her Dame Edna glasses. No, she was happy. She didn't want to leave yet. Wallace? Then the world began receding rapidly, the sounds drifting away, the lightness of floating, and the last thing she saw as she slipped away was Billy turning towards her. Saw her mouth open to ask a question, but then Billy was gone. Billy saw Lorna's face go white, felt her fingers slip, begin to fall, caught her just enough to lower her gently to the ground, to frantically feel for a pulse. Cardiac arrest? It didn't matter, she told herself. Treat it as if her heart has stopped. Daphne! She shouted over the roar of the rain. Daphne was beside her in an instant, and they straightened Lorna on the ground and began to compress her sternum there in the rain and mud and madness. 1, 2, 3. Soretta and Mia turned, shock slackening the smiles from their faces, and the two girls fell to their knees beside them. Billy panted, "Phone for an ambulance. Get my bag." The girls bolted up and away. As Billy compressed her chest, Daphne counted. 28, 29, 30. Billy said, "Breathe," and Daphne did for Lorna. Twice. 1, 2, 3. There was no time to get Lorna out of the rain, and bizarrely they carried on in the torrential downpour, crawling around in the mud to change places every 2 minutes, to save their strength, to stay efficient, working like the team they were as they waited for reinforcements. Fleetingly, Billy wondered if they were being selfish, if Lorna wanted to go. But that wasn't her decision to make. "If you wanted to go, why couldn't you have gone in your sleep?" Billy grunted spasmodically as she compressed the frail chest a third. And every 30 seconds, Daphne inflated the lungs, and she tried not to think about who it was beneath her hands. "Come on, Lorna." Daphne's fierce whisper was lost in the noise of the rain on the roof. Then Mia was back with Billy's doctor's bag. She fell again to her knees beside her. "I'll do that, Mum. Take the bag." Billy blinked. Her baby was far from a baby as she elbowed her out of the way and began to compress Lorna's chest with efficient strength. Mia glanced at Daphne and asked if that was right, adjusted her hands and kept going as Billy switched modes and unzipped the bag, began to draw up the adrenaline, and squinted at the dose through the rain in her eyes. Soretta arrived back. "The ambulance is on its way. 10 minutes. Billy nodded. "We can do this for 10 minutes if we have to." She hoped they wouldn't have to, because the longer it went on, the less chance of success they had. She held her hand up for them to stop for a second, and they all paused, mud-splattered comrades amidst the falling rain, the thunderous noise on the roof, the swishing of the trees as the storm built. But that was nothing to the shock of disaster to one of them and the angst of the unknown. Then Billy bared the frail chest, pushed aside the wet lace singlet, and injected the adrenaline straight into Lorna's heart. They all held their breath. Until Lorna drew one. Lorna's chest rose in a wheezing gasp, and then another, and they sat back on their heels. And Billy fell across Lorna's chest and then hurriedly lifted off her and tried to contain her relief. Daphne had her hand over her mouth, and Mia and Soretta began to sob in great uneven gasps. Lorna struggled to rise, and Daphne wiped her eyes and gently pushed her back. "No, you darn well stay there, young lady." She hiccuped and sniffed, and Soretta picked up the umbrella she'd forgotten she had and opened it over their patient. Lorna said softly in regret, "I liked the rain on my face." Much later that night, after Lorna had been settled into hospital for observation, Billy insisted the others go home, while she decided to stay nearby in the townhouse in case Lorna needed her overnight. But there was another reason she wanted to stay. She needed to talk to Morgan. Man, she needed to talk to Morgan. But would he want to talk to her after the way she had walked out of his flat? His response was curt when she rang at first, but she persevered. "Would it be possible for you to come out and talk to me tonight?" "It's late. It's pouring." "I know." His voice was cautious. "If you need me to." She didn't want to use the Lorna card. That wasn't fair. She wanted him to come because she asked him, not because he felt sorry for her. She closed her eyes and tried to banish the picture of her hands on Lorna's chest in the rain. If she didn't, she was going to cry. She tightened her hand on the phone. "I need you." There was a short silence. Then, "I'll be there in 15 minutes. I'm not at Blue Hills. I'm at the hospital. Lorna had a heart attack. I'll be there in 2. He wasn't much longer than that. Morgan came striding up the corridor of the hospital towards the intensive care unit, like a hero in a movie, and Billy wanted to throw herself on his chest. But they were all sitting outside the doors on the waiting room chairs with Lorna's son and daughter-in-law. They'd all seen Lorna briefly, though they weren't encouraged to stay. Mia and Soretta had refused to leave until Lorna was pronounced stable enough to fly to Adelaide for specialist assessment. They'd find out soon if that was going to happen. So Morgan and Billy left to find a private place to talk. Which is how they came to be sitting in Morgan's car in the dark, where nobody could hear them, with the lightning illuminating the night sky and the steady rain splashing off the bitumen of the road and pouring along the gutters. She told him the details about Lorna, about the resuscitation and her transfer later when she was stable. He didn't know anything because the locum doctor had the phone. Then she told him about Joseph. She kept nothing back, like she had for the others. "And that's why I didn't want a relationship. I judged badly last time. And it wasn't just me if I stuffed up again. Mia had to be safe, had to come first. But she's older now, independent." Billy paused, took a breath, held it. "And now that I've met you, I feel differently." Billy let her breath out. There. She'd said it, or as close as she could go without some encouragement from him. So now all she could do was wait for his response, and the tension was ramping up again inside the car. Morgan shook his head. "You didn't trust me enough to tell me you had a psychopath on your tail?" Her heart sank. She'd known this was going to be a sticking point for his pride. She could see and feel his big, muscular silhouette vibrating with the need to protect, and she couldn't change the cold, hard fact that she hadn't let him support her. His protective streak wasn't a bad thing. She might even grow to like it if he gave her the chance. He wasn't quite a psychopath. She thought about the beaten man being turned away by 5 strong women. And he's gone now. It wasn't your problem. He shook his head again in the dim illumination from the streetlights, still diluted by the rain. She could feel him building that wall between them again. "What if I wanted it to be my problem? What if you keep other things from me that I think I should be part of? That's my dilemma. That's why I kept pulling back. And now you're confirming how much you kept from me." "We'll work on that. I'm telling you now." Hopefully, they could progress. Billy crossed her fingers in the dark, not game to touch him yet. "Your real problem is that I'm planning on staying here for a long while. I want to give us a chance." "Are you?" A car drove past, and she caught the glimmer of a smile illuminated by its headlights before he hid his face. Good timing, car. Billy prodded. "What about you?" She saw his head turn to pick her features out in the dark, and felt his hand rise to touch her cheek. "Oh, I'm planning to stay too." He paused. "Permanently." "Really?" Some of the tension seeped from between them, through the rivulets of rain on the glass and out into the wild weather. The storm was calming inside the car. She felt the slow release as his shoulders came down, felt the wall shimmer and crack and disintegrate into scattered remnants around them, until a different kind of tension began to rise. The kind he seemed to be able to switch on for her with just a look. "Now that is a problem we should talk about," he said, reaching for her. Epilogue. A week later, Lorna was discharged from the Silver City Rehabilitation Ward. She'd been transferred and flown back from Adelaide, where she'd undergone a single bypass for the clot that had stopped her heart, and apparently her cardiologist was still shaking his head that she'd survived. Before she'd left on the air ambulance with Hector and Michael, Lorna had made them promise not to spend money on flowers. "If you want to spend money, then donate it to the Flying Doctor Service and send me the receipt. That would make me happier." As the news had flown around town, helped by Mia's posting on their website, the 2,000 likes on Facebook, and the flurry of tweets, the donations to celebrate Lorna's survival had topped $2,000. More than Morgan's photo, Mia kept reminding him. That hadn't stopped the array of floral arrangements that had filled her room when she arrived back at Silver City, though none of them had been bought from the florist. All the flowers had come from gardens and rose beds and homestead patches, arranged with love and admiration for a tough old bird who'd given everything for so long. When they picked Lorna up, none of the homestead girls stayed home, so it was a bit of a squeeze, with Billy driving, Daphne, Soretta and Mia in the back, and Lorna in pride of place in the passenger seat, sitting sedately, as if she hadn't caused anyone a minute of worry. Soretta spoke for all of them. "I never thought I could have forgotten it was raining, not after the drought. But I did. I swear that night you scared the living daylights out of us, Lorna. We love you. Don't do it again." "I promise," Lorna said meekly, and a collective sigh of relief filled the car. Acknowledgements. To the readers of my last book, Red Sand Sunrise, you were so enthusiastic and generous with your support and encouragement, I have chosen to write again about the incredible people who carry our agricultural heritage through tough times. This topic was particularly poignant because as I wrote this book, outback Australia was suffering the longest drought in 100 years. Families had to ship their animals, watch dams dry completely, look for other ways to make ends meet, or just walk away. There is such strength in their connection to the land and mateship for each other. I loved writing about these outback heroes who deserve to be celebrated, and the nurses and doctors who fly out to care for them. It was such a great relief when the drought broke in Western New South Wales as I finished the book, and I could write the rain scene I had wanted so much for the real people out there. Distressingly, Queensland is still waiting for rain. May it come soon. To Penguin Australia and my wonderful editor, Sarah Fairhall, who flew up from Melbourne to launch my first book and is always available in my moments of doubt with her full attention, faith, and excellent suggestions. Also to my copy editor, Alex Nalu, love your work. And to my publicist, dear Maria Martina, who is such fun to work with and who helps readers find me with her boundless enthusiasm. To my agent, Claire Forster, who does all the tough stuff and is always looking out for new writing adventures for me. You are a champion. To my writing family, of whom there are many, including Carol Marinelli, Trish Morey, Kelly Hunter, Anne Gracie, Barbara Hannay, Linda Brumley, Alison Roberts, Meredith Webber, and Lillian Darcy. And to my good mates, Bronwyn Jamieson and Annie Seaton, as well as many other writing colleagues who share the highs and lows of writing, including Eloisa James, who saw the beginning of this book. To my midwifery friends, who laugh when I go off on another research trip and wonder out loud if I'll find my way back to work, and who drive miles for my book launches. And especially to Ray, who helped me find a bolt hole when I needed a quiet space to write. You are all true friends. To the wonderful Gillian Thurlow, who so kindly gave me an insight into her journey as a flight nurse and the details of the ins and outs of transferring patients by air. You are a star. Thank you. I'd sincerely like to thank the people I met in Broken Hill, who were so inspiring. Thank you, Kim and John Cramps, for the sheep discussions, the glorious sunset tour at Mount Gips Station, your generosity in answering my questions over the next few months, and your warmth and sense of humour. Also, for letting me take over your shed for my ABC radio interview, while you all listened inside. To Billy and Elaine at the Outback Church stay, Broken Hill, who could not have been more generous with their time and kindness. To Ray and the Broken Hill Tourist Information Centre, who sent me the newspaper clippings from the Barrier Truth, and to the reporter from the Barrier Truth, who opened doors for me. To the staff at the Visitors Information Centre at the Royal Flying Doctors, Broken Hill, and Steve Martin, General Manager at the RFDS Centre, who shared so much of his time and experience. To Silver City Scenic Flights for the aerial tour of Broken Hill and the surrounds. And to my new friend and reader, Fiona Osteen, who grew up on the land and worked on far-flung stations in her school holidays, and said I got it right. And finally, to my husband, for his endless patience as I wander vaguely off into my writing world, and for organising and sharing my outback adventures. Thank you, Ian, my rock, my biggest fan, my love, and living proof that there are strong, heroic, honourable men in my town, too. Belinda hopes you enjoyed the reading of The Homestead Girls, written by Fiona MacArthur and read by Caroline Lee. Our audiobooks are becoming increasingly popular among travellers, families, and people who are on the go. If you really enjoyed this audiobook, please introduce your friends and family to the experience. We're sure they'll love you for it. If you want to hear more about our fabulous range of titles, please visit us online at belinda.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to always take a Belinda audiobook